I think someone made a hilarious comment on a video where someone said like when he uses power, he looks really like scary and gaunt, and someone called him like Lord Buscemi eyes because he just looks like he's like and he hasn't like slept in years or something.
I'm starting to feel like this guy got misplaced and he should have been in the Lamenters. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Lorecrimes. Today we've got something very special. It's been some time since we properly covered a member of the Adeptus Astartes, the Space Marines. And so, for such a monumental return to form, we've decided to cover, I was going to say one of, but no, just the most powerful one in the setting, by quite some margin. I imagine it goes Space Marine, a whole lot of tiers, him, and then Primarchs. Without further ado, I'll give you the grand reveal. We're talking about Mephiston today, and
hey, not Chaos Sicarius.
I mean, like that's not fair. Like he's above the Emperor. He's the Cato Sicarius. No, today is Warhammer's very own blonde, time-stopping vampire. I had to get that in once.
Dio, come on.
I will shut my mouth on it going forward. I promise in the same way I promise this is a sleep schedule reset. So I probably won't.
Colin hasn't been to sleep for a while.
24 hours!
He swears it's the last one, he swears.
I wish I had these powers. I could get so much done.
Just know, everyone watching, that we put our health at risk for this podcast.
Please sleep for 8 hours a day. I am not a sleep denier.
Please sleep for 8 hours a day, I beg of you people.
And it's ironic that this is kind of like the vampire faction, and here we have Colin, who's like upside down like a bat.
IRL
trying to stay awake.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, but before we get into that, I think it's about time for the question of the week. So we're gonna go over last week's answers real quick.
All right, thanks very much, Colin. This week's question of the week, we had some interesting stuff about the Necron dynasties that you guys were making up in the comments from our last video. And so and I believe it was #Dynasty, which is a classic Lorecrimes original meme from the first episode. So without further ado, let's go through some of my favorite picks of comments. Starting off with Tristan Wood 1308, and he said #Dynasty, the Iron Hands dynasty. Known for actually having iron hands made of iron, they've been stuck in a several thousand-year legal battle with a specific Space Marine chapter over naming rights. There we go, that's the first one.
This guy, he's targeted my beloved, my boys.
Again.
You get so much Iron Hands hate.
I know.
Comments.
It's
So
so
sad.
unreasonable.
Something last time as well
reasonable.
about it. It's going to be a recurring joke at this rate.
Oh,
Look,
man.
if you're gonna be boring, you should be hated on.
Ooh,
Oh man,
I don't know.
says the Eldar player.
I think they're cool.
Ooh.
The Eldar
Yeah.
aren't boring, they're just elves, so everyone hates them because
They are
no one
boring
has
because
taste.
GW shows no love currently.
Oh.
That's why they're boring, Colin. It's not your fault, but it's why
Oh, and they show love to Metal Man,
they did. They
Metal
got,
Hands.
More
they got
than the
straight
Eldar,
to
I
the
don't know.
point.
That's
That's
true.
fair. We're both been
Everyone's
both
at
been
least sad
dirty
that
hands.
Ferris died. No one's sad the entire trilogy exploded.
Oh, pain.
I don't know. I'm reading through the Eye of Medusa book on my Kindle, so I'm having fun with the
Nice.
Iron Hands. There's just not much lore, and it's all old books, which is a bit frustrating. But anyway, moving on to our second of the #Dynasty comments from Harry Ballantyne 398. The Dovak Inn Dynasty, very open to trade with the lesser races. Though every piece of technology they trade comes pre-installed with some strange archaeotect called Skararim. Their main form of defense is using transdimensional beamers to teleport their foes away. No one knows where, but the psychic echoes transmit the following words: "Hey, you're finally awake."
Okay.
God does it again.
Did it again.
This has Mike the Liar written all over it. This guy is so sabotaged us.
Harry Ballantyne will be known as Maik from now on.
I will brooker no Maik slander in this podcast.
He knows many things, and
You would
he's
never
a good
lie
chap.
to me.
No,
Khajiit has
no.
wares.
Khajiit has
Harry's a
many
regular commenter, so we see you.
Mm.
We appreciate the love. Keep
man.
it up, man. We appreciate it.
Love
Khajiit has skooma.
What's the scoop
Do you reckon it's-
in Warhammer?
There's
Hammer
only one
sack,
thing,
whatever.
like
I think that's
hammer
just
sack.
whiskey.
Yeah, I can't think of like any like jet is what I keep thinking of. I was like, no, that's Fallout again. No, Todd Howard.
There's
They
like
really
a couple drugs they bring up, but they're like in some way related to combat usually, like slot.
There really hasn't been like a kind of epidemic, sort of drug plotline in Warhammer yet, and that's clearly the part that GW are missing. So GW, if you're listening out there,
The Emperor's
clearly-
children, they've nicked all the drugs anyway. They're like, they're all mine. And then like, don't do any drugs, Imperial citizen, it's heresy. It's naughty. Don't do it. Although they have got Warhammer crimes, maybe we'll see more of that. That'd be quite interesting.
Yeah.
Warhammer is a drug. Frick.
Plastic is the
Plastic
drug.
crack.
It's red. Yeah.
The pile of shame.
impact your
but-
wallet in the same way.
I don't know. With Khajiit though, going back to them, I always like find it a shame that in Skyrim you can't just be like pet the Khajiit. Like, why not? It's just a cat.
It's a grown man, technically.
It's a cat.
Underneath that.
Yeah, you ask for consent, but you're like, can I just give you a little chin scratch? Just
I don't know, bro. I think they're just a different kind of elf. Maybe I should kill them all,
Pelennor White Streak here. I don't know.
including Garfield.
Oh,
What?
He's in the
Cheshire
opera
Cat.
video. He's in the video.
We are not Mer.
oh dear. Oh, and before we get any more elf slaughter going on, final comment I've picked. I quite like this one. It's from your boy Striker 3750. Said #Dynasty. My dynasty shall be dubbed the Pankenesis. Their only purpose is to serve bacon and pancakes to any human with an accent resembling that of the ancient Terran tribe known as the English. Their reasoning for this mission is still unknown to this day. There was a big argument on that episode where me and Hal were like, why would you put like pancakes with bacon? It's weird.
I think it all comes down to that breakfast should kind of be more savory, just from, and it's the idea of it being
Dinner is
sweet.
savory, bro.
Dinner is pudding is dessert is.
Exactly.
I mean, well, let's not get into how much sugar there is in American food stuff because I
Yeah,
Yeah,
so I
you
can't
guys
wait
can
to
you'll
put
win
sugar
that.
on
You'll
this
win that.
sugar-based meal. Oh, it's like carbs on carbs on
Yeah,
carbs.
yeah,
Yum,
yeah.
yum,
That's
yum.
right, buddy. That's right. Come on,
Yeah.
it's tasty.
I mean, not that
Yum,
English.
yum,
Look, you can look. I get our food is like horrendous for you, but I do not. Breakfast can be sweet.
Yeah. Don't you like having honey on an English muffin? You're English. It's
No.
a English muffin.
English.
Come on.
I have honey and tea, but that's about it. Honey on dessert or tea.
My favorite pre-workout meal is English muffin with honey and eggs. What the heck?
Is this one
You
of
don't
those
put the
things
eggs
where
on the English
it's-
muffin. It's like separate,
The
but
kind of muffin I'm thinking of, I don't think it's the same muffin. That's the thing.
yeah, it's like
I sent an English
like-
muffin into the general.
I don't know. I just don't like the idea of eggs being anywhere near honey. That just seems strange to me.
well, no,
Apologies,
you don't
you
put the
sweet.
honey on the eggs. You put the honey
No,
on
but
the
it's
English
just
muffin.
if you eat
It's
like
a
2
simple
bites, then the
Warhammer.
palate's going to get confused. That's not a muffin. That's like a scone.
For all the
Yeah,
people who came for their
Yeah, but
Warhammer
come on,
lore.
English.
Whereas Americans
I'm not gonna say that actually.
Listen to these people, dear viewers. Fucking scone. They're making up words.
Not
Oh,
biscuit.
and scones are sweet. Scones are super sweet.
For all the people who came for
Depends
their
what you put in
Warhammer
them.
lore and they come to do with what breakfast debates.
Hashtag culinary crimes.
The
There
next
we go.
verse is going to be breakfast versus breakfast at this point.
Yeah. Oh dear.
It's just-
Anyway,
we could argue that for all time.
Yeah, that'll be our like anniversary episode. Like, yeah, breakfast versus. Anyway, let's not get too sidetracked. We're here for an interesting episode about the boys of the Ninth. So we've got a Ninth Legion / chapter themed next question of the week for next episode, and it is hashtag Black Rage, and this is all about what is the one thing that makes you rage about Warhammer? Now, this doesn't have to be necessarily just lore. This could be about the business. It could be about the models. It could be about the lore. It could be about anything. As long as it's about Warhammer or Warhammer 40k, what makes you hashtag Black Rage? And that's the next question of the week. I'm interested to see what the comments are going to be about that. But otherwise, I suppose it's time to pass back on to Colin to get into today's episode.
And with that done, it's time for the beginner section, where Andy will be taking it away with the beginner basics of Mephiston. Andy, what kind of lore do you have for us in store today? The floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Colin. I'm going to say this up front. I know Hal has a very vast script up ahead, so I'm not going to take up too much of your time. And also, I have a slight confession to make. Although I am the Mr. Imperium man, I know a lot about the Space Marines, my Mephiston knowledge is not as vast as Hal's. And am I right in thinking he has like 3 mainline books and several short stories, and he's in a lot of he's like in Devastation of Baal, he's got 3 of his own books, he's in the Warhammer TV series briefly, he's all over the place, so there's a lot to cover. And so with that in mind, I'm not going to take too much of your time, but we'll go over the basics. So Mephiston would originally be born on Baal Primus, where if you're a Blood Angels fan, you might realize that a lot of times you hear about Baal Secundus, which I believe is one of the moons, which is where their base of operations is. But Mephiston was born on Baal Primus among its tribe, and he was a young boy known as Kai. And from his humble beginnings among the irradiated wastes of Baal Primus, he would become probably the most powerful Space Marine ever with time. But, you know, this is during the 41st millennium, I believe he's born. Eventually, with time, he would be inducted into the Blood Angels and become one of their librarians. Originally, he was a Lexicanum librarian. He would be known as Callisterius when he ascended as a fully fledged Blood Angel. And with time, he would become the chief librarian of the Order. And he would also, interestingly, become an honorary member of the First Company during their boarding actions of the Space Hulk, the Sin of Damnation. With time, he would... There's not really not that much known about his time as Callisterius, because that's not really the fun part. But with time, he would develop a craven for a bit of blood, and then he would be subsumed by the Black Rage. Now, we all know about the Black Rage, more or less. It's the death knell of Sanguinius that all Blood Angels are cursed with. If they submit to their inner rage, they are overtaken by visions of their Primarch dying at the hands of Horus Lupercal, and are completely frenzied in their need to slay Horus the War Master. And if you happen to be in the vicinity, the Blood Angel is going to be seeing red, and they're going to see you, and they're going to see the War Master, and they're going to cut you to ribbons. Even if there's you and 10 of your friends, they'll see 10 Horus Lupercals, and they'll rip you to pieces, because that's kind of their deal. They're noble warriors, but they also have this inner savagery. But interestingly for Mephiston, as he would become known, he actually survived the Black Rage. He's one of the few Astartes that went through the frenzy and came back sane enough to become a member of the Death Company. And funnily enough, in Mephiston's case, he would, when he was serving in the Death Company during the Second War of Armageddon, it happened again. He got the Black Rage twice, and he would be, I believe he is trapped during the conflict of the Second War of Armageddon. He's trapped under a bunch of rubble of a big temple. And while under the rubble, suffering the Black Rage, he can't really move, he can't really fight, he can't do anything. And so he just has to deal with it. And for a while, he's trying to crawl out of the rubble. And by the time he gets out of his entombment upon the world of Armageddon, he rises from his second time surviving the Black Rage. And he inhabits the title of Mephiston. And I believe this is a title he has within him. This is something where he embodies a fragment of the Black Rage. He's kind of the avatar for the curse of the Blood Angel. So at this point, he relinquishes his title of Callisterius. He becomes the so-called Lord of Death. And with this power as the avatar of the curse of the Blood Angels, he has these psychic black wings which he can use to fly. He's supremely powerful as a psyker, and the Black Rage empowers him further. He also has this sword called Vitaris, known as the Sanguine Sword, which is a force sword similar to a Nemesis force sword that the Grey Knights use. In that, it's empowered by his inner rage, and it bursts into a crimson flame the more angry he gets. And again, we've got a lot to talk about. That's kind of the basic overview of Mephiston. He's everyone's favorite crazy uncle / vampire wizard. I don't really know if there's much else to say before we do the deep dive, if I'm honest.
I'm just ready. I'm roaring to go.
Yeah, I know. I was like, I want to keep this brief.
There is something cool though, which is his sword, Vitaris. It is supposedly like a gift from like a lot of other like the librarians. They have staffs, and obviously sometimes if they're really good, they're able to like transfer like their power through a sword. And Vitaris is particularly cool because it's kind of like Thor's hammer. It like comes back to him when he throws it or like yeets it at a demon. And my favorite part is literally he just whispers it and he goes like Vitaris, and it just goes thong and it comes back. And it's usually on fire. And
it has like a weird boomerang etching in the top as well, which is quite funny.
Yeah, it's currently in Australia as we speak.
Yeah. Mephiston flings the sword, and then as soon as it comes back, you just hear in the distance, "Good day," and then it comes back.
Bogan Librarian Sword. I think that's the title for it. No, it's a really cool sword. I think that's my only thing before we get in.
I like how the first time he comes down from the Black Rage, it's like he calmed down a bit, but the second time it's like he went full circle where he went just pure calm because he's so unbelievably mad. He's like, we've looped around, I am now a sea of angry calm. It's like when you get so mad it just short circuits.
When we go into it, there's actually a few times where it's actually come and gone quite a lot in his story, but there's a couple of main times he does go through it. But I think someone made a hilarious comment on a video where someone said like when he uses his power, he looks really like scary and gaunt, and someone called him like Lord Buscemi eyes because he just looks like he's like and he hasn't like slept in years or something.
I'm starting to feel like this guy got misplaced and he should have been in the Lamenters.
Yeah, for real.
You are in the wrong chapter.
Hello, fellow Blood Angel.
It's following us.
Yeah.
Oh my god. With that being said though, is everyone ready to dive into the full-on expert / long story of Mephiston's journey?
Yes, sir.
Chief Psyker of the Blood Ravens.
Oh, that one's corrected by Korn, wasn't it? That was a weird move. GW. Sorry, Relic.
They gave her stamp of approval.
With that being said, though, if you guys are listening, if you're new, or even if you're just painting your Warhammer figures, there's a decent amount to go through on this one, so do strap in. And also feel free if you want to add any comments, boys, because again, this will be a bit of a roller coaster. So we begin with the story of Lord Mephiston, Chief Librarian of the Blood Angels, the Lord of Death. He's the most powerful psyker in all of the Adeptus Astartes, but his story begins centuries and centuries before he even became the Lord of Death, and it would be in good old M41. I know we've done a lot of our episodes, particularly like heresy focused. This one is full on. This is worst timeline humanity here. We're in the 41st millennium, and as Andy did say, we begin on Baal Primus, where a child would be born into the roaming tribes who sort of wander around the irradiated wastes. Quick note, Baal Primus is a much bigger planet. It's like bigger than Earth, so the gravity is actually quite a bit stronger on Baal Primus. You think that would make them all a bit shorter, or maybe like squats, but apparently not. It just makes it on hard mode for some reason. But it gets worse because the child who is born is named as Kai. Sounds like something from Avatar: The Last Airbender. Unfortunately, it's not. But he's going to go through a bit of a journey in this one. And Kai was essentially just a simple tribesman or a child at this time. He had literally nothing. I think it says his only possession is literally like a piece of colored glass on a string, and like that's all he has really. And he also had like a really
Kids these days with their tablets, luxury. When I were a kid, I only had a piece of string with some glass on it.
When I joined the Astartes, we had 2 sticks and a rock.
And we shared the rock.
My favorite part is that there's like a vision quest, like looking back at this time, and they all comment that he's actually quite ugly as a child. Which is
Oh,
quite unfair.
Leave the guy alone.
what, the other blood angels.
It's all blood raven.
Oh my
A
gosh,
bit too
man.
much bird in there. Also, Kai unfortunately had a really terrible father. He was quite mean, and eventually Kai would run away because death was better. And running away in Baal on any of the planets, they purposely keep it quite rough on these like desert worlds. So it was basically certain death. But Kai would be a bit luckier. He would find this hunched sage sort of figure who would help nurture the innate abilities that Kai possessed, because at this time it was becoming clear that Kai was a psyker, so he was connected to the warp. He had power. He could throw funny lightning bolts at people. He gets to do really cool stuff later, but again, that's spoilers. But as all the people on Baal would see, powers like this don't go unnoticed. And eventually the Emperor's angels would appear, and they would take him to do the trials of the Blood Angels. I'm sure a few of us probably know, like, they have, there's that really awful one. They have to, like, essentially get all the, I say young initiates, but we do mean young children, essentially. And they basically do, like, a rat run. They go through, like, a desert, and they have to fight. There's, like, massive scorpions, and they have to try and get past them, and it's pretty awful. And they have to essentially go in a blood sarcophagus, and they have to survive like the visions of that. And Kai would actually pass these grueling trials, and then he would, as many different Astartes chapters do, in fact many even just general warrior lodges in history, he would discard his old identity and he would become Calistarius. And Calistarius is obviously a much more... Also, go ahead, sorry?
Is there a single Space Marine chapter's like initiation rituals that aren't just atrocious? Like, do any of them just have like, yeah, whoever does the most sit-ups, you're in?
I think there's maybe some of the more ultramarine focused ones are a little bit
true.
more.
I mean, the Raven Guard do a lot of like, they teach you how to like pack stuff into your armor so it makes less noise, and it's all about. I'd assume because they're quite stealthy, they're not as much like, right, go into the flogging machine and eat the glass.
Blood coffin.
Yeah, like eat the glass cereal. It's like, no, it's more about sneaky. But when you were talking about the tough trials, about the blood angels, I was just imagining like the Space Wars going, oh, my trials were tougher than your trials. And then the Ultramarines like, my trials were tougher than your... And Imperial Fist, I wore a bodysuit that inflicts pain. Mine was tougher. And then the Grey Knights just going, amateurs, and just never-ending pissing contest.
And no one wins, except us who enjoy the lore. And good old Calistarius, who'd be trained in his psychic abilities, combat, war, all that good Space Marine stuff. But a little bit uniquely to the Blood Angels, they would also be trained as artists and poets and all that kind of, I guess, extracurricular is the best way to describe it. And there's a really good part where it mentions... Well, Calistarius mentions like he actually remembers the first time he heard music, which I thought was a really cool detail in one of their books, because you would go, oh yeah, like a super soldier who was like a tribesman, he wouldn't have actually heard any, like, a lot of them don't really live good lives until they, funny enough, become Space Marines, which is quite ironic. But he does remember sort of hearing music for the first time. It's like bit. I remember hearing that and thinking that was quite wild.
It's a very Blood Angels thing as well. Like Zephon, he used to play piano, and then he got his arms cut off and he couldn't play piano anymore, and he was really annoyed about it.
Oh, that's kind of pain. But luckily Calistarius would go on to be a fully fledged member of the Blood Angels. He would leave the Baal system and he would go to wage war across the stars. He was often mentored by his good friend. Now, this guy, one of my favorite characters in Warhammer, by the way, but like not a main character. His name is Gaius Racilis, and he is also a librarian in the Blood Angels. This man, if you read the Mephiston book, is an absolute Chad. This guy is like your best mate. He always comes through, and he is just the most. He's actually quite an old Blood Angel, not as old as Dante, but he's got like white hair, which is quite rare for a lot of Space Marines to never get to that age. But
Bit of a shame he doesn't have any art, but it's
nah, unfortunately. But Raceless is like that kind of grumpy old dwarf figure, but he's a ripped Blood Angel, and he's like
the grumpy dwarf vampire. Okay,
pretty much, yeah. He's a Chad, and Calistaris was, just as a side note, he was actually quite well liked, and he was known for being a very warm and bright person. He enjoyed many good friendships with figures known as Reclusiarch Quirinus and Apothecary Albinus. I think Albinus is still, I think you can play him still on tabletop. He's the the head of the sanguinary priests, the ones who are like the apothecaries for Blood Angels. I think he's the
because I'm thinking of Corbulo, who's like the apothecary equivalent. What are they called? Aren't they just sanguinary priests?
I think so, yeah. But he's playable on tabletop, and basically everyone liked Calistarius. He was the Joey of all like the Friends cast, essentially. A bit smarter. But eventually
Calistarius came in and went, "Hey, how you doing?"
How you doing? Saying that to the Slaneshi. Oh god.
The Joey or the Fonz?
No, that is Joey. How you doing? Isn't it?
I've never seen Friends.
You've never.
Neither have I.
I've never seen it either.
It's
Oh
not
my god!
I mean, I'm not a 30-year-old lady.
It doesn't seem like something I'd like.
God, people would.
How can I
Jesus.
enjoy
It's
this?
the most
There's no
watched TV
Master
show
Chief.
of all time.
Really, for real.
Jesus.
There's
Where's the swords and the dragons and the guns
Yeah,
and
dude,
the
amen.
space?
I mean, you don't watch as an adult. You meant to watch as a kid because there's nothing else on TV. Pain.
When my sister was watching Ross in Friends, I was watching Ross in Band of Brothers because that's the better version.
That is the better version. Different
Ross
vibe.
with PTSD.
I know he didn't
Jeez.
make it to the front lines in that, didn't he? He got
No.
quit. He got
Oh, he didn't get to the post then, did he?
no, they got mutinied. I think he did.
Hi ho, Silver.
I also haven't seen Band of Brothers.
Yeah, they're
That's
vibe.
good. Oh my God. I'm not surprised by Colin.
Yeah.
But eventually, Calistaris would be, as Anna said earlier, he'll be attached to the first company, Lexicanium Calistarius, to enter the Space Hulk, the Sin of Damnation, which, by the way, that name, Sin of Damnation, does go hard. I appreciate that one. And this will be where Calistarius will be asked to delve into the mind of an ancient comatose blood angel. Supposedly, he had been injured here like centuries and centuries ago. So he's been in like sort of, Space Marines can enter a comatose state and preserve themselves, but Vespario would never survive these wounds, unfortunately. And as Calistaris was delving into Vespario's mind, he saw the manner in which he had been attacked and survived, because there was a somewhat mystery to it, because he had obviously been in battle, but then he'd locked himself in like a locker room area. So, but it only could be done from the inside, which was bizarre. So everyone was working out how could this mystery come about, and they were kind of running out of time on this Space Hulk. And eventually Calistaris would push deeper into his mind, and he would see the truth that there was a Gene Stealer cult. That's right, Four-Armed Emperor time. They would be on the Space Hulk, hidden in the depths, and they had created a Gene Stealer hybrid from a Navigator. So that was incredibly dangerous, because something that powerful could not be allowed to live. And Calistaris would eventually lead the Blood Angels to go slay this beast. For sad for Eli here for the Gene Stealers. They got crunked.
You cry.
But unfortunately, Calistaris wouldn't leave this encounter without some mental scars, as when he delved into Vespario's mind, Vespario had been afflicted by the Black Rage, and a little bit of that had sort of affected Calistaris' mind. Does anyone wants a brief explanation? I thought maybe one of you guys could explain very briefly what the Black Rage is, perhaps, to someone new. Has anyone got a good idea? Because I thought it'd be quite cool if someone else had
I know a lot of people get tripped up between the distinction of the Black Rage and the Red First.
I'd
Go ahead. Okay, go on.
mind if I give it a shot?
Yeah, go for
I
it.
actually know this. So the Black Rage is that as all Space Marine legions do, the Blood Angels had their Primarch when they were a legion, not a chapter, and his name was Sanguinius. And when he died to his brother Horus, it was such a brutal and violent death, and the culmination of years of betrayal that it left a psychic aftershock. That's a good word, I think.
Yeah.
On Sanguinius's entire bloodline. So now, if you have Blood Angel's gene seed in you, you suffer from the Black Rage, which is where you get angrier and angrier, and eventually you start to think you are Sanguinius on the bridge of the Vengeful Spirit, Horus's flagship, and everyone in front of you starts to look a whole lot like Horus, and you basically relive that fight on the Vengeful Spirit, culminating, of course, in whoever kills you. In your mind, it replays as Horus finally slaying Sanguinius, who is now you.
Yeah, it's quite okay. Sorry.
Which is, I'm really curious as to the logistics of that. Just like how many Horuses can you see before something goes like clicks? Like that ain't right.
I know. There's like a distinction where some people say if there's other blood angels around you, you'll see them as blood angels, and you'll kill everyone who isn't a blood angel that looks like Horus. But if you're surrounded by just blood angels, they'll start to look like Horus, and it kind of has a tier list almost of priorities. And then there's a really good visual representation of it in the Angels of Death series, where Kazarion, who's a veteran of the Death Watch, comes back from the Death Watch after not having anyone help him with the Red First and the Black Rage. And the first episode, there's a scene where he's praying in front of the altar of Sanguinius, and he's seeing Horus, and he's this big shadowy figure, and there's red mist everywhere, and he's continually battling these visions of Horus, and it's really cool.
It's it's at some point, if the Blood Angel does live long enough, eventually there will be an interaction with the Black Race. They all feel it within them, and unfortunately, Calistarius, since this event, would start to exhibit signs of seeing visions of Horus, so it would kind of slip out in conversation. His friend Quirinus, Reclusiarch Quirinus, he started to become a bit concerned. He's watching over his friend, and then there's even a scene where they're about to do a invasion on a world, and then I think Calistarius says, "We'll finally, eliminate them, and then we can kill Horus." And then he goes, "Wait, what? I mean, kill the enemy." So it slips out in certain conversations, and then it's obviously clearly starting to take over. And unfortunately, though, eventually it would be building and building. And even his friend Quirinus, good friend who was promised to watch over him, unfortunately he would be lost in the warp. His ship would be lost during this time, and so he didn't even have that friend to rely on. And eventually, I know it's a bit. So what's that? Sorry.
I just said, "Geez."
Yeah, it was a bit of a slow decline for Calistarius, because he was he probably could have gone on a bit longer if he hadn't done the sort of thing with Vespario, but it is inevitable for them all, unfortunately. Some fight it better than others. And after fighting the Black Rage for decades, unfortunately Calistarius would fall to the Black Rage, and he would be assigned into the Death Company, and he would fight on many different battlefields, just essentially lost to the Rage. The Death Company is essentially led by Death Company chaplains, and they are basically just directed maniacs, and they kind of they have to the chaplains sing Blood Angel hymns to essentially calm them down for just brief moments. But
there's an interesting they recently on Warhammer Plus released a solo episode of Blood Angel that gets completely subsumed in the Rage, and then Kazarian and Chaplain Raphael have to go and find him. And from that episode, it seems that the regular Blood Angels don't know about it, because when they discover him, Raphael has to shoot his name's Lucretius in the head, and then Kazarian's wait a minute, this is what this leads to, this is what we become. And then the chaplain's we swear an oath, and he kills the guy, and he's the report is he died a hero. That is the report. And he's he died with honor. And it's really interesting that they have this inner turmoil that they don't talk about, and they have to keep secret, so the rest of the main battle companies don't, I suppose, spiral more quickly into the Black Rage.
They even
Ignorance is bliss.
their chaplains, like their high chaplains, are basically in charge of as well, like eliminating those who fall to the Black Rage. So it's a pretty. There are some Blood Angels out there. I think it's Astorath the Grim. He literally just kills Blood Angels at this point. So it's a pretty hard existence.
It's
okay, sorry.
As much as I very much enjoy the jokier side of Warhammer. I mean, case in point, you can phrase this as the ultimate expression of daddy issues. It really is quite just a grim, depressing thing, especially once you learn about it, because I imagine the whole time you're going to be like, when's it going to happen? When's it going to happen? And then maybe it happens to you and you go nuts, or maybe, arguably worse, it happens to your best friend and you're just left to live with that, like, fuck.
Yeah, there's an interesting thing with like the Angels of Death series where it's two characters, the two sergeants, Kazarian and Ancaeus. And Kazarian for the whole series is struggling with the Black Rage and the Red First, and Ancaeus is the strong brother who's like, we're going to get through this, we're going to get through this. And then like the last episode, Kazarian gets seemingly killed, but he survives, and all the squad of the Blood Angels die. And then Ancaeus, as the last survivor, he's been strong the whole series, not shown any signs of the Black Rage, and he just goes, all right, I'm going to go ragey time, and he fights a Tyrannid Patriarch, and he kills it. And so it's like, it makes you super strong, but it can just come out of nowhere sometimes. If you're in a dire situation, the more stress, the easier it is to trigger the Black Rage.
I do think it also, as much as like I think some of the other writers allude to it, it is a sort of thing where they allude to it like it was, say if you have like older family members and then possibly like things like, I mean, obviously a sensitive topic, but like things like dementia and things like that. It's one of those things where it's like a haunting like end coming, and it's like they're all a bit, once they know of it, they're quite a lot of them get very somber, so that's why it's a lot kept under wraps. And also the Imperium doesn't like deviancy, shall we say, in terms of, you're meant to be the Emperor's angels sort of thing, and the Inquisition could look in. But
the Blood Angels are already going around drinking people's blood, and that's kind of, that's the first level of keep it hush hush, and then there's this extra layer, and then there's more and more, and you're like, it keeps getting worse.
I wonder if that's ever let any of them spiral further when they realize, like, we have two bloodline curses, and one of them is like psychic in nature. We can never get rid of that one.
Well, I mean, it's all gonna, they do counterbalance it with much of their noble acts, but with their artistry and things. So there's a sort of point to that I will explain later, because it actually implies into Mephiston's story. But as for Calistarius now, he essentially he's in the Death Company, and he's essentially just a raving lunatic who is sent from war zone to war zone. And he would eventually be sent to the Second War of Armageddon, where my boy Yarrick fighting. Good. If anyone's read the book with Yarrick on the War in Armageddon, probably one of the better Warhammer books I ever made. It's so, because it's all done from the human perspective, and it's so good.
Is that Chains of Golgotha?
I think it's the one before that, unfortunately. I think it's something Saint, if I remember. Chains of Golgotha is when he gets captured by oh my god, what's the orc's name? Gazgul, and he basically just yells at him like, I will kill you, and he's like just smiling back at him. It's odd. But essentially, in the Death Company, Calistarius is just fighting in the middle of a massive orc swarm. He is still using his psychic powers at this time, but it's just kind of a rampaging fiend, and eventually the orcs just kind of almost overpower him, but then a large building, I think it's the Ecclesiarchy building in the area, just gets blown up, and essentially all the debris falls on top of him, and it buries the orcs and him underneath a mountain of rubble. And this would be where the raging Calistarius was stuck. He was in this state where he's desperately trying to get out, but then the Black Rage is taking over his mind. He's still somewhere in there, and he's eventually, because he's actually sat down, and he's forced to confront it, he manages to sort of slowly, physically claw his way up towards the surface, but then also, in a mental way, he pushes the Black Rage down and down, and after 7 days of just literally just crawling and then obviously in his own soul crawling his way back, he does emerge on top of it, and he conquers the Black Rage. He no longer feels angry, but Calistarius was not the man who stood on the ruins of Hades' hive. It was someone new, someone who called himself Mephiston. And a slight caveat here, you're probably thinking, why does he call himself Mephiston? When he emerged from the rubble, he was basically a different person. And he'd like, the way he sees it is Mephiston is like the name of his soul. So Calistarius doesn't make sense to him anymore. And I will explain a little bit more of that. But essentially, Mephiston is born here. So it literally says like it's a rebirth. It is like a new person. And Mephiston sprouts his psychic black wings and he essentially soars across the battlefield. He is empowered beyond belief and he starts eviscerating orcs just because he can. He's kind of exploring his new power until he feels like a psychic presence try to enter his mind. And he is pissed, like immediately, like someone has the audacity to do this to him. And so he flies down next to this shrine and he almost kills the man who is trying to enter his thoughts, only to see his old mentor, Gaius Racelus. My boy, he's back because he was part of the other Blood Angel contingent forces here. And he last saw Calistarius lost the Black Rage for a long time. And now he looks upon this, well, what was once a very handsome and good-looking sort of Blood Angel. As a side note, all the Blood Angels, when they have the Sanguinus' gene seed like plays within them, they all become like more beautiful and like more sort of like statuesque, kind of like Sanguinus. It like transforms them. So Ugly Kai was definitely saved on that. He had a bit of a facelift.
He's got that Blood Angel Botox going.
He definitely had if everyone remembers in the UK, was it Gokwan? He had the kind of Gokwan transformation. That's a really good UK reference there. But essentially, when Racelus now looks upon, it's like, oh, Calistarius, you're back. You conquered the Black Rage. And then he looks upon him and his face is like gaunt and it's terrifying. And it's like a kind of weird, like deathly calmness to his face. And he looks he is literally like, whoa. And he doesn't look
speaks like this instead of how he used to speak.
He doesn't look quite as beautiful as he did before, but in like he still does, but in a kind of like terrifying vampire way. And Mephiston tells Racelus that Calistarius is dead and he's now in his place. And this is where it kind of makes sense, is that Mephiston, he is Calistarius, but it's almost like he watched Calistarius' life, like it was watching someone's life through a TV. And he knows everything that's happened to Calistarius, but it doesn't feel like him. He does feel like a new person. He's just filled with the memories of Calistarius mostly, but he knows he's not Calistarius. It feels like that's like someone else, essentially. And he's like almost taken over his body, but he hasn't. And Racelus, he looks within this Mephiston. He's a bit he's a bit odd, but he sees like a sliver of Calistarius like still in there, but he also recognizes that this is a Blood Angel who's conquered the Black Rage, which has never been done in the 10,000 years of the Blood Angel's history. And so he sort of accepts him and he says, you're still my friend in a way, and I accept you, and you're like something special to the chapter because you've obviously conquered our curse. And Mephiston would now rejoin the chapter, but unfortunately many of them were unnerved by him. Like even just, I think it's a really cool point here, even Dante, the chapter master, he's not scared of much in this universe, but he's actually scared of Mephiston whenever he's in the same room as him. But it's not like he's trying to intimidate Dante. He's just being around Mephiston kind of makes you go, oh, like makes like the hair in the back of your neck stick up. So so they're all a little bit like, okay, sorry?
It's like being in the same room as like a primed nuclear warhead. It's like, it's not going to go off unless you make it go off, but it's still there. It's still a bomb.
But you're hoping that no one drops their phone or something, even for no reason.
It's like, drop my phone.
They recognize like he has got a massive power boost, and obviously when they speak to him, like there is no rage within him. They don't sense like a kind of, he literally is like he's undead. He's sort of very like low and he's very like calm most of the time. But a lot of them are kind of terrified by what Mephiston represents, because it's like, that's what happens when we come back from the Black Rage. Like, that's not what I thought would be a cure. But this Mephiston would be accepted, and he would go on to prove himself. Mephiston, as a character now, is, because obviously he's not Calistarius, he is actually exceptionally cunning and quite ruthless, but not like he's not ruthless where he like chucks civilians at a situation, but he will very much just, civilians are around the area, I have to eliminate that threat, and he will launch himself at it. He's not necessarily a salamander, but he will essentially be the weapon he needs to be. And eventually he does earn the rank of Chief Librarian after this. I remember when I was researching this before, I'm thinking like, when does he become Chief Librarian? Because it's never actually mentioned, but it is like somewhat implied that it's after he becomes Mephiston. Mephiston becomes the Chief Librarian.
Could you imagine though, you're the Chief Librarian at the time, then Mephiston comes out and you see him in a few battles just laying waste to hordes of, and you're like, he's making me look a bit small. I give up. Yeah, I'm going back to like normal ranks. You can be the Chief Librarian now.
Yeah, still stretched. Like, I'm just warming up, bro. Trust me. Like, I'll
yeah.
in a bit. Like, oh my god, my back. But this Mephiston was something different. A brief caveat: like when he was very early on as Mephiston, I think it was at 977 M41, the demon Umkar. It sounds like okay, like that character, but it's definitely not. He did trap Mephiston in the crystal caves on Solon 5. He attempted to lure Mephiston into joining Chaos, but again, like Mephiston is very much, even though there's the power of the Black Rage within him, it's a tool. It's not a curse for him, and he very much rejects any demon sort of treaties or temptations, and he basically literally throttles MCAR out of existence. It's really cool. And decades later, though, is his Chief Librarian Mephiston. He's out there in the galaxy with a contingent of Blood Angels, and they would find a broken Blood Angels vessel drifting in space, and it was swarming with your boys, the Word Bearers, the ones who know the true faith of the
yeah,
of the
buddy.
universe, the true faith.
Heresy.
Not the Emperor's false faith. And Mephiston and his allies would cleanse those on board. Hashtag cleanse it, because they're pretty aggressive. You know what I mean? Even though they're word bearers, everyone's scared of Blood Angels because they're pretty hard hitting. And they would eventually come across a figure who had been missing for a very long time. It was Reclusiarch Quirinus. If everyone remembers earlier, this was a good friend slash even before they were both Lexicaniums or Reclusiarchs, they were friends as Calistarius and Quirinus. And Quirinus has been lost essentially on a doomed ship for a long time. And when he finally sees his rescuers, he's like, oh, my chapter. He sees a gaunt-looking, haunting like figure with a flayed muscled armor, and it's the Chief Librarian Mephiston. And he's confused because you're meant to be Calistarius. And he's like, I'm not Calistarius. I'm Mephiston. He talks different. He's much more powerful. He acts completely different. And it's like a sort of past meeting future situation. The group would eventually join forces and they would go chase the word bearers down. But it was very clear that Quirinus, as much as like he was a very good friend of Calistarius, he despises this Mephiston. And he calls him like an abomination because he's a Reclusiarch, he's basically a chaplain, and he thinks in a way like very differently to what the ideals of essentially a descendant of Sanguinius should look like or behave like. And this group would eventually track down their enemy to the planet of Philen, I think. They would track them down to a planet, and it was filled with a massive like weird arrangement of like Astarte statues, but these are like very ancient ones, so they're very old armor patterns. And they would eventually battle some cultists on this world, fighting a few more word bearers, clean them up very easily, and they would eventually find this relic of Sanguinius. And when they all see it, they kind of fall to their knees in worship. Like they literally cry, some of them, because it's so beautiful. It's like a representation of Sanguinius. It's clearly from the Great Crusade era, and everyone is just in awe except Mephiston. When he looks at the relic, he thinks something's a little bit off about it. He's like everyone's at a restaurant and everyone's eating food, and he's got like, I got the same meal, but everyone is like really talking out of their arse. Like, this is not good. Essentially, he thinks everyone is like sniffing like the wrong soup essentially. Like he's just something's up. But this actually draws more condemnation from Quirinus because he just basically goes, "See, you're not really a true blood angel. You don't look upon this and then see the beauty."
He's calling him a poser in the most obnoxious way.
Essentially, yeah, he's sort of making fun. Well, it sort of creates a split because a lot of the blood angels, in a way, do feel like Mephiston is a little bit other. Although, as much as you think, "Oh, this must hurt his feelings," like for poor Mephiston, because everyone treats him like an outsider, he's not really affected by it because he sees it as them like sort of condemning Calistarius, and so he doesn't really see it like, "Oh, they're not my friends who are rejecting me. They're like someone else's." So it's like a bunch of strangers being judgmental, and you don't really care. But he's not like completely emotionless. He's just a little bit, I think, out of it in terms of all the drama. He's not part of the tea club, essentially. He's not interested.
The artist formerly known as Calistarius does not care.
The artist formerly known as Calistarius. Unfortunately, this Mephiston is right. Something is not up, and eventually this planet they're situated on, it begins to rumble and split. Magma spews up as the slain dead around them was actually they were thrown at them on purpose to power up a ritual. So all this blood that coalesces, and it eventually brings the demon prince Doombreed into real space, and he begins attacking the blood angels. And this is one of my favorite parts. The statues around them, like in this sort of destroyed area, they start to crack open, and they're revealed to be like ancient blood angels who long ago were like lost to the Black Rage, and they froze themselves in place as a sacrifice to bind Doombreed until now. So the blood angels essentially get attacked by their own, and they kind of Doombreed like does taunt them like, "This is your ultimate fate. You know, you join Korn. You know, Korn's got Wednesdays off. You know, Hawaiian t-shirts on Fridays, stuff like that."
Does he look like a bull? Is that? It makes me think about like a Minotaur type name. I don't know.
I hope so. Doombreed is, I think, one of the older demons in Warhammer lore, like the early edition stuff. So he's not really mentioned that much. I think he's even in the Horus Heresy.
That's one of the 50 greater demons he fought from the quiz, right?
It is actually, yeah.
That
like 6 months ago.
Alongside Pippa and Gura.
Oh god, you disgust me. But during this battle, Mephiston, because he's powered up and he spreads his psychic black wings and he just launches himself at this demon prince, and they kind of, it's a really funny moment. They're just like two like, he's like a little gnat essentially, Mephiston, and he's like flying at this much bigger thing, but obviously he's way powered up. So they're just like wrecking the place. They're flying around. They both have wings. And they're just like hitting each other in like the space while magma flies everywhere. Eventually, Mephiston would win. It was quite hard fought. Vitaris made a stunning appearance because Vitaris was just absolutely cronking this thing. I don't know how Vitaris holds up, to be honest, because he just takes a lot of punishment. There'll be some shenanigans with Necrons later, which I'll mention. Will be very cool. And he eventually banishes Doombreed back into the warp. Unfortunately, it's not stuck in place like the ritual, but it is what it is. And during this battle, Quirinus, his old friend, would begin falling to the Black Rage. He'd obviously been alone too long, like what Andy said with the Angels of Death stuff. It was just, sometimes you don't have a brother to rely on, it can really catch up to you. And Mephiston encourages him to like fight the Black Rage, but Quirinus kind of like, with the last of his like sanity, like holding on, he's like really forcing it. He just says, like, he basically rejects Mephiston. He says, the Black Rage is like a holy gift of like, you know, it's literally the last act of our Gene Father. I wouldn't want to ever become like you, which obviously is like quite sad for what would have been Calistarius, but Mephiston kind of just takes it on the chin because he's like, that would have been sad for Calistarius, but I'm not him. And eventually, poor old Quirinus falls to the Black Rage and is shipped off to join the good old death companies. It's a bit of a sad ending because like there's no real victory in this, like that first sort of conflict there, but things get worse because we next join Mephiston on the world of Thermia. Mephiston and the Blood Angels are evacuating the world because, okay, I don't remember the name of the Xenos, but it's one of the coolest ones I've seen, where essentially it's like a multiplying fungi creature it's like in like white sort of globules, and when they touch like flesh, they essentially take over and they get bigger and bigger and bigger. So the Imperium's just given up on this planet, and the Blood Angels are helping evacuate the people. And Mephiston is just there to assist the evacuation, like with all the other Blood Angels. But he's like not on the ground, so you kind of start the book with all the Blood Angels going, "Oh, where's the Chief Librarian?" And then you just hear like the ripping guitar music, like he's over there, and there's this guy on like black wings. It's just like soaring in, because at this point there's like a tide of like running like sort of running weird bulging like humanoid Xenos like in like a horde running towards the survivors.
You can just hear Freebird solo kicking off in the background as Mephiston just plunges just like carving them to pieces.
Anyone remembers like early Attack on Titan, how some of the Titans run like a bit weirdly? It's like that essentially, the Xenos. And Mephiston just soars in, and he's just like laying carpets of fire everywhere. And all the other people
There's
are like,
a superhero landing and everything.
He actually does.
It was hard.
I'm not even joking, he does actually. And he's just like cleaning it up. Like you probably think he probably could take on the entire planet, but there's just too many of them. So he's just kind of, he's the heavy artillery. And he's burning the Xenos in their thousands. And eventually sort of leads to a temple ground. And this is where Lucius Anthros, who's actually the pupil of Mephiston, so he's one of the younger generations, which as a side note, it's interesting now because a lot of the, obviously, Space Marines don't really live forever. A lot of them die very early on even. So like not a lot of them make it to be veterans. And so this is like a new generation of Blood Angels who only know of Mephiston. Like most people now have never even heard of Calistarius or remember him. So it's kind of like that's how much time has passed. And Lucius Anthros, another Lexicanium, would good old Psycho, sorry for people who are new. He would find his lord in a tornado of black fire. Like essentially the Xenos are throwing themselves at him, and he's just like clawing black flame everywhere. And he looks at his mentor's face, and it's like, oh god, that is horrifying. It's literally like a snarling beast. So a lot of the, like I said, a lot of the Black Rage stuff is kept secret, but Mephiston is using it here as a weapon. So he's not really angry. He's actually just contorted with the power of the Black Rage. And he can see that his master is sort of losing control. And this would eventually lead to a confrontation back on their homeworld of Baal. They would enter this like really special blood chamber. I'll do make another side note. The world building on the Blood Angels homeworld in a lot of these books is amazing. So they have like these weird sort of Indiana Jones like sort of tunnels and architectural like museums like hidden in deep in like vaults beneath Baal. There's even like these weird guardians to like some of the librarian quarters where they essentially they look like Space Marines but they wear like different armor, and they essentially guard that area forever and they don't go out ever. And they're like, even the Space Marines look at them, they go, they're like terrifying. And there's like mosaics, and there's like essentially the Blood Angels. You think the Blood Ravens have stolen a lot of artifacts. The Blood Angels have got things created by 10,000.
I was just imagining Dante just going, it belongs in a museum, and then charging into battle.
It's not too far off, to be fair. And Mephiston and our boy, our Chad Raceless, they bring Lucius Anthros into the fold, essentially. They show him this, when I said the blood chamber earlier, it's filled with, like, there's, like, aspects of blood within it that, like, sort of create visions and allow them to, like, scry and things like that. There's even, like, a side note as well, like, Mephiston's personal chambers is actually filled with, like, the old, like, dead bodies, like, the old chief librarians of the chapter. So they all, like, they've had their gene seed removed, but they essentially like their bodies, like their corpses, like still talk to them. So it's like a weird.
I just had like that scene of like him having a tea party with all the corpses. It's like, oh, and how are we, Father? Just having with little teacups in their hands, moving them around psychically in his off time.
It is quite cool though, because there's a bit where like they do talk to Mephiston. There's even a bit where Lucius like enters into his personal chambers, and you can hear like the voices, and they're like judging him a bit because like, you know, they're all essentially the wisdom of the Blood Angels is always there because every like chief librarian essentially guards.
So it's not him being insane. It's just they actually can inhabit their former bodies psychically and be like, right. So
essentially, the ghosts of the chapter is there.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool. And they in this chamber with Raceless and Mephiston, Anthros gets the sort of the down low of what's been going on. So this explains, he gets like a vision of how Callistaros became Mephiston. So he sees a vision of Hades' hive, and then they start to show why something's going wrong with Mephiston. Essentially, Mephiston's powers are growing like constantly, and he starts to show like black flames like rippling underneath his armor, and he's struggling to contain his power. Like he's not falling to the black rage necessarily, but the power keeps going beyond what he can even control with it. But they have a plan, because something has come up recently which has changed a lot of events and has put things into motion. It'll be an artifact called the Blade Purific, which is is an ecclesiarchy artifact that could possibly help contain his power, and then obviously make him an even more potent weapon for the Imperium. And the only problem is that this artifact is on a world which is completely lost. Like, they don't know where it is in terms of, it should be here and it's not here. It's supposedly literally veiled by the warp itself. Like, something is intentionally hiding it. And that's what that's the problem they've had so far. But luckily something else has happened which has allowed them to find it, because Mephiston, the boy himself, like when they've been back on Baal, has been sending his soul into the warp, like alone, completely, like essentially flying past demons, and he's actually found this planet and he's brought someone back with him. And I feel so bad for this guy because he brings back like a ecclesiarchy priest, just a random one on the planet. And literally goes like yoink, and this guy goes, "I've literally just traveled through the warp to be transported back to Baal." And I'm like,
I didn't want this.
Yeah, he's like literally like, sheesh. It's like, oh my god, it's like the worst experience ever.
Just Dante, just going up to Dante, being like, "Hey Dante, look at this thing." There's just like this guy screaming, going, "Ah!"
Yeah, this guy is not. I think if I remember correctly, I think he is a little bit of chaos taint on him as well. That's how he's able to find him. And basically, Mephiston went mine, just went yoink. And when he actually like sees Mephiston like properly, he literally gets like terrified. He's like, "Oh my god, that's the most haunting thing I've ever seen. Literally a vampire in my face." And Mephiston, our boy Raceless, I'm gonna say every time, our boy Raceless, because by the way, when they were telling Anthros of Mephiston's like condition, Raceless is like he's older than Mephiston and like Callistaros by quite a bit, but he sort of is a very overprotective friend, and he's really grumpy because he's actually like very protective of his friend. So he's very much like a kind-hearted guy in the end. He always like backs Mephiston up, and he's always there for him. So I just love him, and I have any opportunity.
Making it sound like a sitcom, just like Mephiston. Like, he's not such a bad guy.
So Mephiston at this moment does not deserve him, I imagine.
I mean, kind of and kind of not, because he's not evil, but Mephiston is not very affectionate.
Let's say he's evil.
He's not very warm, but he still protects the innocent and things like that. He's just. It's just when the people see him,
very misunderstood.
It's a little bit of this Salamander's problem, where like he's not as nice as Salamander, but you know people are scared of Salamanders when they take their helmets off because
he's not any more evil than any given person in the Imperium is.
No, not really. But there are some cool moments that will kind of humanize him in a bit. And essentially, this poor priest that he's dragged from this planet, they use him as an anchor, and then like some of the ecclesiarchy have like come to talk to Mephiston, being like, "Help find our planet." He's like, "Sure, I was going there anyway." And eventually this priest goes, "Oh, you know, that's what a horrible experience." And then he goes like, "Yeah, we're going back." And then essentially they're using him as like an anchor point because he's like connected to the world now. And so they're using him as a ritual point to help open up a massive tear within the confines of Baal. This doesn't go well. Immediately, like Nurgle demons, like trying to crawl out, and they immediately attack the Librarius within their own, like literally on Baal. They attack them within their inner sanctums, and they do manage to battle them back for a bit. And this is where they finally use the ritual and they teleport themselves just literally through the warp, which is actually extremely dangerous. So it's probably why you haven't heard a lot of other like lore times when they do this. And also it's implied that it's only really capable with Mephiston because he is so powerful to be used to like.
I know the Grey Knights can shunt themselves through the wall, but that's because they're the Grey Knights. It's like we're supposed to be the only ones who can do that. But like Mephiston, okay, he gets a free pass.
Yeah, he I guess he kind of is the equivalent to a pack or I guess a cluster of Grey Knights. Essentially, he's used to help empower this ritual. And just a small note here: teleportation, no matter what it is in Warhammer, it's never quite perfect. And even if some of the people who've listened to the Horus Heresy, there's even that scene in Shattered Legions where like all the Shattered Legions who like they survive Isfahan, a few of them, they regroup and they go on to attack like the traitor forces, but they're using reckless moves like teleportation. And like when they teleport, I think it's Shadrach Medusan like teleports from the Iron Hands. He teleports onto a Sons of Horror ship, I think it is, and some of the Raven Guard with him just end up in the structure of the like.
Yeah, because they're at that point where they're like, well, our Primarch's dead already. We might as well just do whatever we can, even if we die trying. They've got nothing to lose.
So it's pretty. I mean, to survive Isfahan, to then go down like essentially because your head was then in the middle of a metal girder.
You can tell it's like a Minecraft chunk error happened.
pretty much.
Although, Hal, you're forgetting something. Teleportation isn't perfect unless you're the Necrons or Leagues of Votann.
Yeah, buddy.
True. Especially if it's warp teleportation. There's also an awful bit here where, and like they're all not teleported perfectly together, so they actually don't end up on the right planet initially, and they have to do it again. But
I just like the idea of Mephiston going whoops and then back in.
Essentially, it is. But the first time it happened, like they're with a squad of Blood Angels, and Anthros sees the Blood Angel in front of him get teleported, like, and essentially his torso is in the middle of the ground, and like a puddle of blood just starts to fall out, and he's like, oh, literally, he teleports like his body halfway into the solid ground. So essentially,
that does remind me of something I've seen where I've seen that happen in something. I can't remember what it is though.
Yeah, it's a pretty, and like the Blood Angel is like crawling like to head, like, help me, brother, and it's like oh my god, and they haven't even got there yet, and they do it again, and essentially a few of the Blood Angels, like 3 or 4 of them, like just don't make it because they get essentially teleported in the middle of objects. That's how they die. But they do make it eventually to the planet, and its name is Divinus Prime, which is also a cool name. And like I said, like, I think the Blood Angels books do really good world building. The strange thing about this planet is it's basically entirely made of bone. And I mean literally, like, not as in like solid bone, I mean as in piles and piles of bone is everywhere. So from literal giant creatures that were probably the size of cities, like rib cages that literally come out of the ground and you can't see the top, to literally like small mammals and like reptiles and things like that. It's literally everywhere across this planet. So it's a really weird place, and even weirder that it's an ecclesiarchy world apparently. So they've been it is a really cool scene there. And also the sky is something's really wrong with the sky, like it's rippling, and it's clearly like the warp shielding that's been happening to it. And this world, unfortunately, is caught within a civil war. There's been a religious uprising, which has been secretly manipulated by Tzeentchian cultists, and they eventually do make it to one of the last cities, the strongholds for the Imperial faction on this world. They have to go through this massive like corridor of like crucified ecclesiarchy priests, which is like kind of like, oh god, it's a little bit haunting. But Mephiston just takes it with chest, and he's like, we'll just have to keep going, doesn't matter. And when they enter this sort of last bastion city, they do meet with, and funny enough, one of Mephiston's like old friends, a man whose name is Father Orsuf. I think I'm getting that correctly. And I'm gonna lie, this is like one of my favorite parts of the book, because Orsuf, like, he's like a 90-year-old retired Imperial officer, and he actually he's fought with Mephiston since he was young. So it kind of makes you think, oh yeah, like Mephiston's, again, like I said earlier, he's been around like as Mephiston for quite a while. And Anthros sees him interact with this like he's called father because again it's like an ecclesiarchy thing, so they're all become priests at this point. And it's the first time he actually sees Mephiston smile, and he's actually like quite warm and friendly with this guy. Because basically like, best buds sort of thing, and like, remember that, and he's like, remember that conflict, Mephiston? He's like, I do, it was a good one, essentially. So it's quite a nice like human building moment.
Do you remember when you pulled that demon's head off with just your bare hands? Like, yeah, that was a good day.
Good times.
Yeah, he's a little bit eccentric. So he's like, one of his eyes is like essentially a monocle, like sort of zoom in like binocular thing, and then he's a little bit hunched over. But as soon as he sees Mephiston, he starts like smiling, like grinning ear to ear, and he's like, buddy, what's up, dude? And he's like, it's like, good to see you, buddy, essentially. So,
Sharon, look who it is. We haven't seen him in ages. Oh, get out the fine china. Yay. Let's have a takeaway. I don't know.
Yeah, they kind of, it's a nice moment where you go like, oh yeah, he actually has been serving around the Imperium. He's actually not like as terrifying as everyone. Basically, everyone gets lured into thinking he's what everyone says about him rather than what he is. And like he's actually he sensed Father Orsos' presence, and he's come to him to help him work out the mystery of the blade prolific, because like they found like little symbols of it around. There's like a trident, or like three sword symbol that people have been wearing as like a holy pendant around. It's like a very confusing plot to the overarching like planet, like something's obviously clearly going on. And unfortunately, as this is happening, Mephiston's power is still growing. His time is like, feels like it's running out. They like black flames are starting to leak a bit more, and he starts to like feel the black rays rise up. Again, he's not really falling to it, but it's kind of like essentially, those videos like when a kid holds like a fire hydrant or like a fire hose thing, and then it's clearly they can't hold on tight enough.
And then they're on a roller coaster.
Yeah, and like the poor fireman has to try and grab it, and it's like slipping around like a snake. That's essentially what it feels like. They do eventually get ambushed, the Blood Angels, within the city. There's like this massive amphitheater filled with thousands of zealous people who've come to meet this traveling priest, but it's actually a ploy by the heretics. And it's quite funny when the priest comes out on stage, because it does say in the book he comes out with like that smile, which is like, hi guys, like he's like a bit nervous to be on stage. I found really funny. Like he's not confident about what he's about to do, but he's like, oh, guess I'll give heresy a try. Like, oh god. It's so fun. Like he like kind of rubs his hands together and it's like, oh god, he's a little bit like cutesy nervous. But he eventually turns into a demon, and basically it kicks off, and the Mephiston and the Blood Angels just dive in. Poor old Raceless and Antros are there too, and the problem is, like, again, Mephiston, he doesn't feel like he can use his power to his full extent, so he's actually struggling to put down this demon, even though normally he'd be fine. Eventually, the entire amphitheater, everyone gets turned into demons by like the little pendants. They're actually little sort of warp-powered infusions, like little kind of what's it when they etch runes into or essentially runes essentially, and they eventually get turned like blue and pink horrors. And the blood, like Raceless and Andros, are just caked in like gore, because they're just like literally every swing is like 3-4 demons down, and eventually they fill the whole place with fire. And Mephiston uses like the flame vortex to help burn all the delicious demons back away. And they are victorious, and they do discover the location of the Blade Prolific. It's high up in the mountains, and they quickly rush to the Guardians' aid. Sorry, the Guardians who are at the relic place find that they are a Sisters of Battle contingent, and they are essentially the Guardians of the Blade Prolific who have been there in secret, and they join them because they're being attacked by a massive force of traitor guard, but they've been tricked, so they don't really know that they're traitors until too late. And then some demons also appear. There's also a demon named Zorambus, who's like a weird twisted, like he looks like a sort of Bretonian knight. I know you're going to hate that, Colin. He looks like a sort of Arthurian legend knight.
Look, I don't hate King Arthur on principle. King Arthur's cool. I hate his bastard offspring from fantasy.
But he does. Zorambus is like a weird figure, and he's obviously. It's implied that there are like multiple factions of Tzeentch playing a game and like competing for this artifact, and he's kind of loses his crap when Mephiston enters, and he's sort of has like a no, I'm so annoyed, like a bit of a Malfoy moment from Harry Potter. The battle between the two forces pretty fierce. Like Mephiston is kind of losing his control a bit as he's basically snapped off Vitaris, and him and this Sorambus are essentially dueling it out. And even the sky above them literally collapses because the warp is failing around them. And it's a very hard book to follow at this point. I had to reread this a couple of times because it's a little bit confusing because it all happens a bit too quickly. Essentially, the sky starts to reflect the true Earth that they're meant to be standing on. And they realize like that actually the planet they're standing on is a demonic like reflection of the true Divinus Prime. So when the powers of the warp are starting to collapse because of the battle, and like all the forces of Tzeentch are kind of losing their hold, the true place, they all have to like essentially jump, and they land on the true Divinus Prime above them, and then the world just essentially flips and the demon one disappears. Really hard to follow in the book, by the way, if you read this, Andy, in the coming future. But it is a cool scene, and they do finally get to the top of this mountain peak area. And then they see the blade Purific, but then unfortunately the last second it's snatched away by some cultists. And Lucius Anthros is pissed because when he was there, he actually saw Mephiston let them go. And he starts to have like a bit of doubt, like, are you a heretic? Like, why the hell did you do that? What the hell's wrong with you? But Mephiston did actually, the problem is that Mephiston, when he arrived there, he used his powers and he looked at the relic and he saw that actually it was a dud essentially. And it wasn't the real thing, and it wouldn't solve his power rising problem. But he realized like there's obviously a massive like something's clearly amiss with this whole event that's been happening, and it reeks of like this like someone manipulating things behind the scene. There's clearly a game going on with like a Tzeentchian cult and maybe even architects behind that. And so he plays like a psychic like what's it called, like when someone wants to trace something, it's like a like what like with spies, they put stuff on things like Ben said, he trace it. That's it. He was like a psychic trace. I couldn't think of the word. He was like a psychic trace on the blade Purific, like from his mind, so he can therefore sort of he lets it go just so then he can sort of then try and work out what's really going on. But it's obviously a little bit sad at the end of the book. It's like he sort of accepts like, I don't think there is a cure for my rising power, but I basically accept that. And I'm okay with it because if I'm meant to die in the Imperial service, that it is what it is. It is what it is. He doesn't say it in those exact words, but it is what it is. And don't worry, boys, we're cracking through. I told you this is a long one. We're getting through.
I just like the idea of like Mephiston at the end of the book going, well, sometimes you've just got to bear with it and keep your chin up, everyone. And it's okay to have a bit of rage now and then. Just bottle it inside. Just having like one of those days
Nice.
at the end.
No matter
It's
how long,
I think that's a Family Guy bit. He punches a wall so hard he bleeds.
no matter how
Who
long you're on
wins
the toilet.
1v1? How does Mephiston or Caldor Trago
Oof.
come out on top?
I would say probably
Cater's
Caldor
Vicarious.
Drago, just because he's more built to fight psychic stuff. Whereas like
And he's
Mephiston
got the power of Matt Ward.
I think Mephiston would do better against mostly everything else though. Like he could beat hordes and hordes of Tyranids and things like that.
I don't know. I'm still waiting for a buddy cop movie with Tigurius and Mephiston going through the
That'd be
wall.
awesome,
That's what I
oh,
want to watch.
man.
And then they just like like that bit in Monsters Inc. where they bump into the abominable snowman and it's Caldor Drago.
my
Like, that's what I want to see.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
What
pretty
a
funny.
reference. Snow cones, anyone? Snow cones?
Exactly.
What flavour is that snow cone? Looks a little sus.
He's like moving a pile of rocks back and forth into place. Like, this is the portal. How do we get back?
That's an old film now. It's good though. Those films are so well written, they even hold up now, which is so cool.
For real.
Wizard of Oz is old, but it's still a classic.
Here you go. Something's
Those
a
flying
classic.
monkeys haunted my dreams as a kid.
I hope you're not telling me Wizard of Oz isn't a classic.
No, it's a classic, but it doesn't mean it's good.
Yeah, I'm not really a fan either. I'm not gonna lie. I think it's just because the monkeys gave me nightmares when I was a kid.
I mean, that's fair. I mean, you guys out of every reason not to like it. That's fair enough.
Okay, side rant. If everyone has seen some of the older James Bond films, I've watched every single James Bond film. They are all classics, but some of the older ones, like there's like a definite tone of like, oh, this is old school, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So,
Some of those attitudes.
GoldenEye's the only one you have to watch. GoldenEye's the best one.
Good old
Hey
Sean
guys,
Bean.
you don't have Heredity Horus Heresy books?
You haven't seen any more James Bond movies, have you?
Correct, Eli.
I've only seen the new ones, to be fair.
Skyfall's good.
Yeah, they're okay.
Speaking of Mephiston, though, not in James Bond or having those attitudes, Mephiston would next appear at the Devastation of Baal. This is one of the best books in Warhammer. If you haven't, you can actually read this as a beginner. So if you are listening, you're like, I don't really want to read like a Warhammer book. This is a pretty good one because it's a really
I haven't listened to it yet, but it's kind of one of those classic. Like, if you're getting into it, this is a good one to start with.
We probably have to do a full episode on this one day because there's just so much that happens. But I'll try and go through mostly Mephiston's part, which is at the beginning of the book, he senses from the warp that Kabanda, the demon prince of Khorne, is seeking to attack the Blood Angels. And he wants to try and kill all of them before High Fleet Leviathan, the Tyranids, which are also attacking, basically wipes them out first. So there's like a three-way, well, essentially 2-on-1 situation happening here. And the Blood Angels are in deep crap. Mephiston even interrogates, I'm going to butcher this name because it's so hard to pronounce. He interrogates the Octocalivelave, which is actually I did it first time. It's an ancient, like, immortal Xenos prisoner on Baal they actually can't kill it. Like, they try to, and they just keep it as it's like a chaos corrupted.
It's a zoo animal.
Essentially, it is sentient. It's like a multi-limbed, like, weird thing. It has no other members of its race alive. It's a weird creature, and they kind of torture it once in a while for like information on chaos. But there'd be like, it's even
brother Frederick, poke it with the sharp stick. Okay.
Well, it's even cool enough. It's guarded by a previous chapter. Sorry, it's guarded by a previous chief librarian who was injured by it and now is like in a dreadnought. And he just stands outside guarding this thing because it's the thing that put him in the dreadnought in the first place, funny enough. But he has to guard it the entire time because it's just so dangerous. And they kind of torture it for more information. They basically work out Kabanda's coming to attack the Blood Angels. And this is bad news. So Dante sends out the call and all of the chapters of Blood answer it. So the Blood Angels, essentially, of all the divergent chapters, they reassemble back onto the homeworld of Baal into literally like legion-sized numbers. It's a really cool moment. There's this, I'll be remiss if I didn't mention it. Probably one of the coolest scenes in Warhammer is where all of the various representatives of the different chapters, like the hall is filled with thousands of them, and they essentially assemble for the meeting that they're about to have. And what is paraded in front of them is essentially the best of the Blood Angels. So they see like relics. They all like literally hold their breath because they're seeing like relics of the age of like Sanguinius is like when alive. Essentially, they see there's a relic called the last feather of Sanguinius, and it has even like a bit of blood on it as well from when essentially Nasir Amit, the flesh terror, sort of made it after Sanguinius died.
Eat shit, traitor. That guy.
Yeah, they parade out like old patterns, like their relic patterns of armor from different eras of the Blood Angels. They bring out all their relics, their banners, they're literally all of their sanguinary guard. They bring out Dante, Mephiston, like everyone essentially is paraded in front of the other. Essentially, it's like a massive like showing off of what their bloodline is essentially.
I'm just envisioning like a Blood Angels equivalent of Antiques Roadshow, and it's like, here we have the 31st millennium cup that Sanguinius used to drink out of, and you look on the bottom here, it's got the maker's mark, and they're all just like geeking out of it, and then meanwhile the Tyranids are just getting ever closer. It's like, guys, we're getting distracted, can we like get on with it?
It's a little bit distracting, but it is a really cool scene because essentially like there's all these chapters in different armor and they have all different looks and things like that, but they all just kind of stare at this moment of like essentially the glory of the Blood Angels is put on display, and Dante like sits down wearing the mask of Sanguinius, and they all just go like, it's like they all like nudge each other and they go like, oh my god, oh shit, you know what I mean? Like they kind of like lose
Look,
it.
it is. Oh, where's my phone?
It is
Click.
like it's eerily silent. when they're all just essentially staring at the glory of like their bloodline, because some of them haven't even probably interacted with the Blood Angels for literally thousands of years. So this is like it's a massive moment. And it's really well done by Guy Haley, the author. It's a really cool scene. I've not even done it justice here, but if you ever read that book, you'd be like, oh my god. And where was I? So they have this massive sort of just basically this like massive display scene, and they say like, you know, Tyranids are coming and we need to stop them. But then Mephiston is given his secret mission because they don't want to let the rest of them know what's really like. If they knew about Kabanda coming as well, where like essentially the forces of Khorne, there's like, oh crap. So Mephiston is actually, he's given carte blanche to do whatever he can to stop Kabanda. And he even asked Dante, like, I could do anything I want. And he just goes, just do what you need to do. And he's like, okay. Because they're about to do something which is a little bit heretical. So he takes a contingent of all of the different psychers from many of the chapters. So like they're all in like different armor, and they follow Mephiston into the crystal caves of Baal. There's a cool scene to fair when they're trying to fly there, and there's obviously the shadow and the warp from the Tyranids, so they're a little bit like dulled in power at this point. And essentially they get attacked by flying Tyranids like in the initial invasion, and Mephiston goes, I got this. He literally like opened the back door, and he eventually flies out with his wings and starts crunking Tyranids in the air, and all the other like psychers are going, oh my god. And then all the other Blood Angels are like, yeah, that's my boy. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's what we got.
What is that thing? Oh, that's one of ours.
What do you have?
That's our boy.
That's our boy. And he does return. He flies back. He literally does it, and he flies back in, essentially like Iron Man moment. And they enter these like secret caverns underneath Baal. They're filled with blood crystals. So they mention like they harmonize and they like enhance psychic power. So they feel like their strength return to them. Like Mephiston was like almost like stumbling as they were walking in, then he starts to like walk up straight, and he looks a little bit too tall. And it's like, oh god, he's like really powered up. He's even more powered up than usual. And this is the part where they start to get a little bit heretical. They do this ritual where they have like, they all drink a portion of each other's blood, and they're all bonded together as like sons of Sanguinius. And they literally open a tear into the warp on Baal, like on Baal Primus, so they're back on the original planet, not Baal Secundus, where the chapter masters and the monastery is. They essentially open a portal into the warp. They push their power together, and essentially Mephiston draws his Fataris, ignites it with fire, and sprouts his black wings and just says, oi, Kabanda, fight me. And essentially he has to delay Kabanda as long as possible. And he says it a lot better than that, because he says it in his like Lord of Death voice, which is like really raspy, like, you will not.
And Mephiston said to Kabanda, my dad could beat up your dad. He said, what? And then they get into a big fight. Yeah.
Or to be fair, if it's for people who are new, this is literally the Balrog versus Gandalf scene. And
Epic.
Except Mephiston is not using a staff, he's using a sword. And him and Kabanda battle for a bit. But this is Kabanda inside the warp, so he's a little bit too powerful. And Mephiston does his best, but he was never going to be able to beat a demon in the warp, even in as much as he was empowered by the other Blood Angels. In fact,
let's not forget he's kind of got a storied history of the Blood Angels, and that this is the demon that basically gave them their Red First curse, kind of. I believe he bolsters that in the Horus Heresy. So he's like the arch enemy of the demons for the Blood Angels in a lot of ways.
He's also Commander's literally attacking now because he wants to kill the Blood Angels before the Tyrannus does, because he's like, that's my kill. And
kill steal.
Do not have time.
Pretty much. And Mephiston does a pretty decent job of like holding him off for a time. But again, he had probably no chance in winning. And the rituals does start to fail. Like, I think it's some of the psychers, the commander tries to tempt them, and they'll hold firm for a decent part. Like, even Raceless, like the older librarian, is like, hold it together, boys. Like, he's, again, the Chad move. He's like holding it down. It actually does start to crumble, unfortunately. Funny enough, Antros is quite young. So even though he's a powerful Lexicanium, he is quite young. Unfortunately, he's actually the chink in this, and it starts to fail there. Eventually, they're pushed back into real space, and the kind of crystal caves collapse on them. They do all live, but they are literally out of the fight for the rest of the devastation of Baal. But their plan to delay Kabanda has worked slightly, because Kabanda, instead of landing on Baal Secundus and essentially wiping out where most of the Blood Angel forces are, he actually lands on Baal Primus, which is, again, like the sort of big planetoid, and it's not where most of the Blood Angel's forces are. And he essentially gets thrown into a horde of Tyranids. And I can't remember the name of the chapter, but it's like a renegade chapter of Blood Angels, so they're not even loyalists technically. But they throw themselves.
I'll have a think.
They throw themselves as like a last sacrifice to essentially die.
Was it the Knights of Baal?
The Knights of something. They're the Knights of something.
Knights of Blood, Knights of
Knights of Blood could
Knights
be
of
it too.
Blood, possibly. They essentially wanted to die like a worthy death. And there's a cool scene in that where one of them is like, because they've already been drinking blood and they've been like essentially disowned by the Blood Angels at this point, and like the Imperium.
Yeah, they were definitely renegades.
They were on the
Knights of
no-no
Blood.
list.
Yeah, but one of them, like, they kind of do redeem themselves a little bit, because they're not evil, they just kind of fell to the curse too much. And he literally looks Kabanda in the face, and Kabanda tries to tempt him, and he literally shrugs it off. So even at this point, he's like, no, even now I still reject the corruption. But he does get crunked.
I like to admit it's that scene from one of the Aliens movies where they're all like huddled around the computer, and it's got the machine gun ammo rounds, like what's left counting down as the xenomorphs are throwing themselves against the automated turret, and then it hits the 0, and you have Dante like, well, that's a chapter gone.
Oh, they do.
Now it's our problem.
Entire chapters literally get wiped out during the devastation of Baal. It's horrendously like enormous as conflict. But before, unfortunately for Mephiston, he's kind of, and the other librarians, like a lot of them, there are some out there still, but this contingent, they're out of it until they do dig themselves out of the rubble. They emerge after the devastation of Baal has ended, and they find the Indomitus fleet, and Rabute Gilliman has arrived. Your Grand Administrator is here, and the situation changes. The Primaris have arrived. All the chapters have been renewed. Essentially, it's a new era, and this is sort of it's a renewal for the Blood Angels, and they survived the devastation of Baal by the skin of their teeth. But they lost a lot of, like, so much was lost, like, historically and in terms of culture. But they're still around. Essentially, they lived. Post devastation of Baal, Mephiston continues fighting, but then he sort of comes across this psychic block in his mind. Like, he struggles to use his powers are still growing at this time, but he feels like a massive psychic block on his mental powers particularly, and he starts to search for the source of this. He believes something out there is doing this to him, and he's begun to see ghosts, people who he has fought with over the centuries. They start to haunt him, and he sees them. They're all creepy, and something is clearly not wrong. So something's clearly wrong with him. They eventually battle across the galaxy until they find a planet named Morsus. And Morsus was now dominated by Necrons. The undead Necron tomb mummy boys are here. I'm sure Eli's probably enjoying this moment a lot because...
Please, Gene Taylor calls in Necrons. Big win today.
All of his Christmases have come at once.
We've got some funny on this one, though. Side note as well, Lucius Anthros, the pupil, he goes off on his own journey to help find a way to save Mephiston, so he's not with the crew. But Raceless, your bad boy, and Mephiston go down to Morsus themselves to help. They think the source of his psychic blindness is here, and they also want to investigate because his world was previously an Imperial one that supposedly was meant to be recaptured in something called the Revenant Crusade, but clearly they were destroyed by the Necrons. There's also, small note, there's an awesome scene in the beginning of this book where Raceless is like, they're on their ship, and he goes into Mephiston's quarters, and he just sees a flayed man, like, kneeling down, and essentially all of Mephiston's skin is like in the air floating, and it's turned into like a star chart. And he's like, and Raceless goes, yo, that's weird. But he also goes like, I get you're the chief librarian and all that, you're powerful Mephiston, but even he's like, oh, I'm gonna like throw up because that's disgusting. He literally flays his own skin off himself and then disgustingly reassembles it back on. Apparently it's all fine. So I think he initially thought it was like his armor, but it just that's because he actually obviously his armor resembles like flayed like muscle beneath, but it's actually just Mephiston. He's just like a weirdly not blinking thing in the middle of the room, horrifying. And as they make this way down to Morsus, there's also another funny part about this planet. There is a Necron court held on Morsus. There's a slight problem with this Necron court. They're all insane. Well, the Pharaon is actually, he's woken up from the great sleep and he is not right. He basically has the Necrons, like the warriors, essentially doing mock battles, like randomly shooting things in the desert that are not there. He also like powers up this massive device that just keeps them really clean, whereas it should be like awakening other things and like destroying, you know, like enemies, things like that. He just uses it to essentially be like a power cleaner, like a big Hoover.
At least he's hygienic. Not that he's got like a nervous system or like viral infections can affect. It's like, oh, it's fine. Keep our armor nice and shiny. Priorities in the wrong direction.
It's essentially that thing we talked about in the Necron episode, where like the Necrons don't like touching flesh. Like, oh my god, they're like sick. And there's even a funny part where like he actually he starts talking to the corpse of an actual Necron tier, like somehow a preserved Necron tier corpse is there, and like supposedly it was his brother, and he's like talking to it. And he's like, well, what do you think? Ah, interesting, and everyone's like, oh god. There's even a part like a visiting cryptech has come to the planet to like do an investigation, like a little kind of safari, like, oh, I'm here to search for technologies. Like, oh, this guy is not right. So there's all kind of shenanigans going on.
Warhammer 40k has a lot of scenes where a brother is talking to a deceased brother. That's like a recurring theme.
Good old Horus and Ferrus Manus' skull.
Yeah.
That was horrific, that moment. It was like, yuck. When like a Fulgrim basically chucks his like dead brother's head in the floor, and then Horus is like says he has to like force down or throw up because like, oh my god, my brother. He's like, I get it, we still hate him, but like, yuck. But essentially, yeah, the planet's like crazy. Something's wrong with the Necron forces. Like even when the Blood Angels arrive, there's a funny part where they're being attacked by the Necrons immediately, and Mephiston goes, wait a second, let me think, checks his like archive, and then just basically goes in front of the forces and goes, I declare a right to parlay, essentially, like from Pirates of the Caribbean. You know, everyone remembers the Black Pearl movie. It's like parlay, and essentially the Necrons go, crap, he did say the word, didn't he? And then they have to like basically uphold like a ceasefire whilst they intrigue like a court summonings possibly that will happen. So it's like, oh god, that's hilarious. The Mephiston and Raceless do make it down to Morsus, and in the kind of depths and mines, they find the remnants of the Imperial forces there. They're like the generations like later of the people who were from Morsus, so that all they've known is like the Necron uprising. And they also find a force of people called the Blister Men, and they are essentially Ogrins that are been irradiated, and they've kind of been blistered, and they've kind of not been working with the humans for a while. But they've been like fighting the Necrons like with mining tools. So literally they get like a chain hammer or a chain jackhammer, sorry, and they're literally like jackhammering the Necrons whenever they see them. And they do like sort of gather the Imperial forces together, and they meet in this like weirdly immaculately carved temple ground, supposedly carved by the Ogrins over the last like how many decades. Everyone's like, oh, that's kind of weird. Like, cause
what a sentence that is.
I know, it's like weirdly
carved by the Ogrins.
Yeah, it's like weirdly immaculately done. It's like really impressive. There's even the bit that gets even weirder is like there's a statue that looks like Mephiston in the middle of it, and they're like, you're the savior. And then it starts to get weird here because Mephiston is like, this is clearly not me, but it's like meant to be obviously a space marine or maybe even the Emperor. Like they don't know what's going on. And then the ghosts of like the dead, which have been slowly over the story, like he's been catching glimpses of them, and then people have been like, you're right. He's like, yeah, I'm fine. And they eventually swarm him here. And they're essentially like shouting at him, telling him all of his sins, like everything wrong he has done. And he essentially retreats his psychic mind into like a mind palace, and he's essentially losing it. Like he's realizing at this point now, it's like Mephiston, he's losing like a lot of the memories of like what he's done as Mephiston as well as Calistaris. He's kind of becoming like a monster in his own mind. Like he, again, you know, there's a being that's just been fighting and fighting, and he realizes like his memory's been failing, and he doesn't know why the ghosts are so angry at him. And this is where Chad Raceless, my man, comes in. He joins Mephiston in his like little mind palace area, and he tells him, you know, what you needed to do essentially is remember who you like. You don't need to remember everything for you. I can be your memory essentially, but the only thing you need to remember is that your purpose is that you are the Lord of Death and you fight for humanity. And he goes like, oh yeah, that's all I need to do. Like, so even if he does end up becoming a monster and like, you know, what everyone says he is, it doesn't matter, because as long as he keeps doing what his duty is, that's enough. And he realized like Mephiston, the ghosts were not like an outside force. It was actually his own psyche producing them as a way of like sort of to help remind him of like all the promises and things he has to honor. And he eventually like, I am Mephiston, Lord of Death. As all like, I just need to basically be the best Lord of Death there is. And sort of embraces the ghost. They kind of like hug him in a weird moment. They all like accept him, like, well done, you remembered your purpose. Because at this point he's been so lost in like following leads and quests and like fighting. He's forgetting like the overall purpose of what his power is meant to be. Because again, he's like been blessed with the power of like over the Black Rage, and so he's forgetting that he needs to really use that for humanity's betterment. And so he declares that the Revenant Crusade that previously failed to capture and save Mortis will be reignited, and all the Ogrins and the humans like join together, and they will basically, they're going to take on the Necrons. Even though at this point Mephiston had been like, it's basically, before this he'd been like, oh, it's a doomed mission, why are they even bothering? And Raceless at this point, you know, tells him, they all come to the conclusion like they should just, why not? Because even if they win or lose, it's about fighting for the right thing. And they do take on the Necrons. The Imperial Guard actually do a really noble moment here. They kind of let themselves be like a sacrifice and like a distraction, so they know that they will die. But again, like the other people who live on the planet will live if the Necrons get destroyed. And eventually Mephiston does like, he basically knows they die because he eventually sees their ghosts. He's like, ah, shit, you know, they're dead. And unfortunately for the Necrons, I'm sorry here, Eli, Mephiston does blow up the Necrons.
Sag.
Big F.
He does. There's a point here where he does fight some of the Necrons as well. Colin, what's that thing? I think you said you knew something about this earlier. It was about how they compared him.
Indeed, I believe it was one over the Necron Lord who says that though Mephiston is undoubtedly powerful, he is a child compared to the Eldar sorcerers of old.
Yeah, so even Mephiston now was like nothing compared to what the War in Heaven was, which is a bit hard to imagine, like in terms of like, that's like, how do I imagine that just being a real thing? But apparently, yeah, he's even as powerful as he is, and he does end up winning and beating them. They're still like, damn, like you weren't nearly as good as the previous Eldari.
Well, you see this, the way to imagine it is look at the sun and then just turn it off.
Which is also pretty insulting.
When you have the Eldar.
I mean, poor Mephiston as well, because actually he's a very, as much like it's hard to explain like all his badassery, he's actually really intelligent in terms of like when he's not fighting, he's constantly reading like books and stuff like that. He's essentially in his like comfortable robes, like learning and learning and learning, because that's what a chief librarian has to be.
Nerd.
And well, he doesn't. I mean, he did that and then destroy your entire homeworld. So like, he doesn't.
He's not a nerd. Yeah, sure, he can do that.
He is true.
Like I was like nerd. It's like we all like listen and read like lore books for our channels.
The irony nor the hypocrisy is not lost on me.
But luckily, he sort of they eventually had to push like further into the Necron tomb, like underneath, and they find this device, which the original Lord had been powering up like his Necrons to keep them clean in his like craziness. And there's also like a visiting cryptic who I briefly mentioned earlier. Unfortunately, I can't go too much into that, but essentially him and Mephiston have both a moment where they both snuck into the chamber and they go, ah, you know, the Spider-Man meme where they both point at each other? It's kind of like a, you. and they have like a small conversation where like Mephiston is like bluffing. He's like, I know more about this than you, and you're like, oh really? He's like, and he starts to say things like quite like obviously things that show off his intelligence is like mathematical and things of physics, things like that. And eventually he does start to waffle a bit too long, and then the cryptech goes, he's starting to sound less intelligent now. It's because Mephiston is trying to like work out how to operate the device, and he goes, oh, like he eventually does work it out. And this is the weird part where like the Necron device only works when you use psychic power on it, which is strange because no Necron is a psyker. So obviously it was probably not even a Necron device. Maybe originally it probably was an Eldari one. It's implied that, and
maybe even belonged to the old ones.
Maybe
salvage.
But Mephiston just
it's like a lactose intolerant man developing like every type of cheese. It's like, why are you doing this? This will give you no benefit.
I yearn for what I can't have. Although, come on, I have not known a single lactose intolerant person to actually care about eating cheese or ice cream.
Very true.
There's like a weird, funny scene where the Necron Lord does show up, like catching Mephiston in this cryptech, like with their pants down, and then he's brought like his corpse brother with him, being like, he's talking like, can't believe they were here, like they invade our inner sanctum, it's crazy. And then but I haven't really mentioned too much, but like one of the consorts of the Necron Lord who was like kind of sick of his crap at this point and had been like, oh my god, I hope this guy dies. She's actually painted in red, so it's implied like if you watch our Necron episode that she was one of the people who like would drag them to like the bio furnace, so she's actually one of those people. So her armor was like painted in red. She just basically at this point in the book, there'd been like a side plot of the Necron thing. She had enough of this lore because she wasn't crazy. She's like, oh my god, we can't. She's had enough, and just ends up slicing the corpse in half, which makes the Necron Lord go, oh my god, how could you? That's so awful. And the Necron essentially like that under her control just end up fighting, and then Mephiston powers the device that the Necron Lord had been using to keep his Necrons clean, and sends like a shockwave through them. They all just blow up essentially in one big go. Apart from the cryptech. Apart from the visited cryptech who just runs away being like, Jesus Christ, what a mess. That was the events on Morsus. Only 3 more books to go, boys. But way to go. One is a bit more shorter, luckily. Shortly after the events of Morsus, Dante and Mephiston together would battle a demon prince of Slaanesh, Kairis the Perverse. Kind of can guess what he's like, / she's like, / it's like.
And also has a storied history at the same time as what's his name, Kabanda. Those two are both with the Black Rage, the Red First. So yeah, they have a history.
Gotta wonder how the meeting for that went down in the warp. Like, we need you two to work together. It's like, what did Khorne and/or Slaanesh convince them to pull that off?
Well, the entire Horus Heresy is mostly that, isn't it?
I mean, that's not stopped Chaos from being at each other's throats before. They hate each other.
Immediately when the opportunity is awry, they go for it, don't they? But
True enough.
Yeah.
Finally,
there's been enough Ever-Chosens.
Warhammer fancy for people who are not initiated. But at this point, this has been a little bit after the events of Morsus, not very long to be fair. And as we mentioned earlier, you keep thinking, oh my god, this guy is saying Mephiston's power is growing, but I swear it hasn't had like a backfire in a while. It happens here. It's finally gotten to the point where Mephiston cannot contain his power any longer. And as they're fighting Kairis the Perverse, the Black Rage just essentially fully envelops him in terms of it's like flooding out of him, like he's a conduit for it. And like black flame and just roaring power flows around him. It actually turns some of the Primaris Marines into the Black Rage, essentially. So this is like oh crap, the bloodline the bloodline curse is not cured. There's like a real harrowing moment. And the demon sorry?
So the Black Rage is like it is their bloodline, but that's like a psychic curse, right? Like the red curse you could theoretically get rid of if you were good enough at Gene Seed, but the Black Rage it's magic.
Yeah, you can't. It's like endemic in them, but the Black Rage is all Chaos's fault. Basically Chaos's fault.
Like, one of those is like an illness like that runs through your family. The other is just straight up like you are cursed by a witch.
Well, till this point though, when Dante received the Primaris reinforcements, they actually thought the Primaris might be free of the curse, and even like some of the Blood Angels, like the
Lamenters.
Even other chapters like Gabriel Seth's Flesh Terrors, he was like saying like they're not true Blood Angels, they don't even have the curse, like what's wrong with them? So at this point,
what's wrong with them?
Well, he thinks like it's a divine curse.
So
no Primaris had ever suffered the Red Thirst or the Black Rage until this point with Mephiston's power going out of control. So this is where Dante kind of goes like, oh god, like they're susceptible to it too. And they do defeat the Demon Prince, luckily. They're on this floating ship, sort of a old Blood Angel ship. But Mephiston's like losing it and he's about to like essentially implode until Dante just runs up to him and like knocks him out essentially. But the power is still flooding around him, and then Dante's like, Raceless, what the hell's going on? And he's like, I'm sorry, like it's just power has been growing for a long time. And Mephiston's like turns upon this like this Blood Angels like specific what's it called, like a tomb / blood tomb thing. It's when they go
like a sarcophagus.
Oh, that's like blood sarcophagus. That's what it's called. When they the one they use when they transform into Blood Angels. And Mephiston's power is so great that they place like so many psychic wards on this blood sarcophagus to the point where it's actually impossible that anything could leak out of it, but his power is leaking out of it, which is like the Blood Angels essentially like this is not possible. There's
hashtag leaky fisting.
leaky fist. So God. But Mephiston essentially is dying. Like his body is not. It's like black flame is like rippling all over it, and his soul is actually in the warp. So he's kind of just in his own like place. He's like in a weird like middle ground place. It's hard to explain. But they do kind of believe that this is the end of it from Mephiston, unfortunately, until a contingent from Mars and Belisarius call rock up, and they agree to transform Mephiston into a Primaris. And you're probably thinking, why do they choose Mephiston? Well, it's actually because they hadn't really done the Rubicon Primaris transformation on any Blood Angel before. And they even said, like, at this point, only person who had done it successfully really was Marnius Calgar, good old Ultramarines. But even then,
Big MC.
Some of the Ultramarines, like most of the Ultramarine lieutenants who went with Calgar, didn't actually survive with him. And I think even with a Blood Angel, it's like they're a bit more divergent. So the
and Dante was just going, "Can I do it, please?" I'm like, "No, you're too important, please." Like, no, let the other one do it first.
Mephiston,
please.
It's just Dante's begging to die. It's just so desperate. And they do agree to transform Mephiston because they think, why not? Maybe the Primaris frame can hold his power longer. And Mephiston's soul goes on like a weird vision quest. So he ends up seeing like his previous life. So he sees like Kai, he sees Calistarius, and then he sees Mephiston. So it's like all of his life. He even meets the soul of the sort of old man who mentored him as when he was Kai. If you remember that from like very early on in this long ass video. Because they're in like a pocket of the warp which is like not touched by chaos. There are very few of them like ever in the warp, so it's like a kind of peaceful area, but there's nothing really there. And eventually this leads up to Mephiston finding this like blood-soaked figure who offers him this choice. And he looks above Baal in the warp and they see an angel of gold and an angel of black, and they are battling. And this figure tells them like they're basically battling for the soul of the Blood Angels. And it offers Mephiston to become the avatar of the Black Angel, just as the Sanguinor is the avatar for the Golden Angel. So this is kind of, we did mention earlier, like a little bit like, the Black Rage is a little bit more than just a curse. It's like as Colin has said, like it's like a psychic wound within reality itself. And the interesting part it mentioned this in this book as well was that this battle here, like between the different angels, it will affect the area of Baal in the past, present, and future. So it's implied that this, like, no matter what civilization will live on Baal, they'll eventually like come to like the sort of idea like resembling angels and demons in some sort of fight. It's like a really weird thing. So even when humans die out, essentially, like, or alien races long before humanity were on the world, essentially, they would eventually sort of embody this power because it's literally spanned throughout all of time. And Mephiston is told that if he does accept this offer, basically it will damn him, but he'll eventually become the Black Angel. But it will save his brothers for a time and buy a bit more respite from the Black Rage. And funny enough, though, he actually refuses. He initially says no. Like, he says he's done enough. Like, he's really kind of like Dante, where he's like, I've literally been fighting for centuries. I've died twice, essentially. You know what I mean? I died a few times. I survived the Black Rage. Like, I'm just like, I don't know if I can handle it anymore. And it's actually revealed that when he does refuse, this figure reveals itself to be Sanguinius. And then this is like a moment where he thinks he's failed like some kind of test. But the Sanguinius figure, they're not even sure if it is Sanguinius truly, but in a way it sort of forgives him and just kind of reiterates the offer again. And Mephiston makes his choice. Back on Baal, the transformation is going on. But Mephiston's body has been dead for quite a while, which is a little bit funny because like Raceless have basically been playing telephone with Mephiston's soul in the warp, being like, "You there, mate? Yeah, cool, you there?" So he's like talking to him every once in a while, but he's like not heard from him in a while.
Just dialing the warp. The number you have dialed is not recognized. Please try again later. And he's like, "Oh, for fuck!"
Yeah,
getting frustrated.
It's been quite funny. Dante's like been watching it, been like, "Is he there?" Like, yeah, he's still around. It's like my mate is coming. I swear. Like, you know, like you're going out as a group, and then like just someone's friend of a friend is like,
5 more minutes. He said that 10 minutes. Yeah, 5 more minutes. 5 more minutes.
But this is a very cool scene here, though, where the like Race Adventure goes. He's coming back. He's coming back, and essentially Mephiston is rocketing from the warp like back into his own body. But it's not just him. He literally brings 3 souls back into his body, and his body just lifts up into the air, and it's an incredibly like violent, turbulent experience. There's like literally the air around them ripples. Like some of the blood angels around them actually die from the power like around them, and they see behind him a black angel spread its wings. One of the sanguinary guard, I think, does actually get killed by it, which is quite like, oh god. But eventually the power, like they all think like we should kill him now, and then it does start to stabilize, and then he sort of Mephiston's body like knits back together and it heals like in an instant, and he basically lands on his feet again. And again, like you say, like I think Astagrath the Grim, the High Chaplain, just basically goes, he's a demon, like we should kill him straight away. And like Dante's like, wait a second, let him cook, like, you know, let him cook. We're giving for a lot, because obviously Mephiston's like basically been the poster child for Primaris Blood Angels, so they're trying to see if it works. And he sort of has like a talk with Mephiston. They actually both in secret, like it's sort of a private conversation, they both mention seeing Sanguinius in the warp. It's an interesting part where they kind of go, like Dante asks him like, was it really Sanguinius? And then Mephiston's like, yes and no, because Sanguinius is dead. Like Sanguinius is dead, but it could have been a sort of a manifestation of his soul, an echo of what he was. It could have been something pretending to be him.
Not the first time a mysterious thing pretended to be Sanguinius and made a deal with the Blood Angels.
Yeah, so it has. They both do. Even funny enough, Dante did promise to keep that, like his own vision that he saw when he almost died on the devastation of Baal, like to himself. They kind of both tell each other about their own experiences, like seeing this Sanguinius, because it does feel like the real thing, and it's a really like touching moment because they're both like that's our gene father, but it's also we can't allow ourselves to believe it is truly, because obviously Sanguinius is very much dead, you know, so he's not real.
Yeah, but don't give us hope, that kind of thing. Don't give us hope.
But it is disappointed. But it is cool, but it's like they both in a way take like hope from it, and they both like find it as like, because they've both been, like I said, like they're both very clearly ready to die, which is like I think like we mentioned like the sort of tragedy of the Blood Angels, that they're both very much, as much as you think like, oh, Mephiston, he's like this, he often appears to be like a cold and uncaring thing. He's actually just, he is like a normal person. Mephiston is like, he emerged into the universe from Hades' hive, not really having much to himself other than the memories of someone else. But he does, obviously, he basically does turn into his own person. Like he lived longer as Mephiston than he ever was Calistarius. And
Sent
sorry?
an image, official Warhammer image related in the chat. It's Mephiston and the Blood Angels having Thanksgiving dinner.
That's a good one. Vitaris is a cool sword as well. It's got a little like hooks bit to the end. But yeah, he's sort of, Mephiston's been ready to die for a while. Funny enough, which you wouldn't have expected, but obviously he's
running theme with the Blood Angels,
because he doesn't suffer the black heredity like them. He's not like, he even says like in his own words, the usual hunger and thirst doesn't haunt me, but he still obviously just had a lifetime of war, so he's ready to go. But they do find like a sort of renewal, and particularly more Mephiston. He's very much like, I'm ready to get out there. And they do like have a mini test where Dante like, go do that mission. He goes like, sure, and then just annihilate some gene stealers. Sorry, Eli. And then it's really funny.
They have no happy ending by design. You can't wow over that.
Whole union with the Star Children.
Okay.
Funny enough, there's a funny bit where like he's talking to them, and he basically says like, I know what you're about to say. You're about to give me this speech and say these things, and they go like, what? How could you possibly know the divine, like, because I've battled you before, you all say the same thing on different worlds, but never mind, you wouldn't be able to understand or even reject what you think, and it just takes them out. But essentially Mephiston is now Primaris, and he's reborn. Now we're on to the very last book. Well done, people, for hanging in there. There's quite a lot, but we're almost there.
I think when you were saying earlier, when I was telling the guy like, I know it's rough, but we're almost there. He should have been telling him like, I know it's rough, but we still have 3 more books.
This is the last book though. So this is Mephiston is Primarist up, and the trio of Raceless, your main Chad, who's Raceless also guarded Mephiston was he was like in his body was like in danger and things like that. Again, he looked after him the entire time, like, and he's greatest defender. They even defended him against Dante when he was like, "What the hell's going on?" It's like, "Don't you dare, go near him," things like that. And the trio have now set off to find the source of these clues that have been appearing over the centuries. It all started on Divinus Prime, if you remember back a little while ago, with the sort of the world of bones and things like that, and then the psychic trace on the relic. There's, over the centuries, Mephiston has been collecting clues. There's someone has been manipulating him in the events. It took him to Morsus as well. Like he was actually directed to Morsus by like some artifacts that lured him there. So someone's clearly been playing him for a long time. Doesn't know why. And also, side note as well, as the time of Lucius Anthros, since Morsus, when he was off on his own, I should briefly explain what happened to him, because it doesn't make sense if I don't. He actually met with another chapter called the Sons of Helios, who they said they had found a way to sort of exist near the Eye of Terror and not be corrupted. And I think they called it the Sleepless Mile. I don't remember the exact chant, but I think it's like, we dreamed, and they would like huddle around or like find a way to like in sort of meditate, and they would chant this, and they call it like the Sleepless Mile, where they put themselves into a trance, and they sort of followed along this path up the like Imperial Palace in their own mind, and it sort of calmed them. And actually Lucius Antros actually fell to the Black Rage when he was fighting alongside them, but they all chanted together like, we dreamed, like in like a way to bring, and it brought him back from the Black Rage. And even when he returned, he was actually more powerful than he'd ever been before. But he didn't want to tell Mephiston. Something was clearly wrong with the way he had grown this power. And even since
I haven't earned it. Oh.
No, but something had been off with Lucius Anthros for a while. And obviously, even though Mephiston is his mentor, like he doesn't. Something is like that thing. Like you don't want to tell your parents something. He doesn't want to tell Mephiston necessarily burden with him. And he's trying to hide it from Mephiston. He does feel really guilty about this, but obviously, in a way, he's actually able to mentally trick Mephiston. Like Mephiston tries to invade his mind, and he actually holds him off, which is usually not possible for a psycho of any other level other than Mephiston. So Mephiston kind of goes, And what's even weirder was like when Mephiston, because his power is so great, like he also has a little bit of prophetic vision, things like that, and he kind of sees events. He's like always calm and in control. Mephiston, he does something. He obviously literally unnerves people, but Anthros at times has said stuff that has caught him off guard, and he's like, "That's not. I didn't expect you to say that." And so something has been obviously ticking Mephiston off to something being wrong. They even go and visit the crazy, like, corrupted Xenos, the one in the Octaviliare one, again, and they get a little bit of torture, like, a couple of fisticuffs, and they kind of do interrogate it a little bit. But they set off to find and put together these clues to try and find who's been at the heart of this grand conspiracy for centuries. But before they do set off, Mephiston allays the warriors of Anthros, and he gives him an ancient Blood Angel scepter as a sort of gift, and tells him, "You'll use this when the time is necessary." This is really important to remember, but essentially Mephiston's planting something. He's saying, even though something's off with you, Anthros, I still trust you, and then here's a gift. And as they set off, there's this really cool scene where they are exploring these Eldari craft world ruins. There's a weird bit as well here where some of the Primaris Marines accompanying them, they feel a little bit weird doing some Blood Angels magic in front of them, because they're like, these Primaris Marines are not like initiated into Blood Angel ways. And so like when they use like certain blood ritual magic that's specific to the Blood Angels, they're like, these Primaris Marines, they're a little bit, they're like, oh shit, what the fuck is that? Because obviously they're like, you know what I mean? They didn't. And
they've been on terror all this time, so they don't know any of the culture from Baal and what they do. So they're like, oh, this isn't what I was expecting. Ugh.
They're a little bit like, oh, that's a weird. But eventually they get like, something starts to mess with them. They start fighting like visions on this craft world, and they do realize they're being messed with. Some Harlequins have turned up, and they started messing with them. There's like this one specific Harlequin that's like been taunting them as they explore these ruins. But Mephiston eventually just goes, I've had enough of this, and just like leaps at him like with his psychic black wings, and just managed to like cronk him in place. And but he doesn't kill him, and he says, we've come to make a deal, essentially. This is the part where earlier, when they've been attacked by some Eldari, the pilots who they were flying down with, their heads get cronked whilst they're flying the ship. And this is when Mephiston shows off his Conodio, like Joe Wilder time power. And he literally, as Colin said earlier, he literally pauses time and sort of sits there for a moment and thinks about, like, he's like observing the brain matter of the pilots.
1 second has passed. 2 seconds have passed.
Yeah, he's kind of like watching it. And he's going, he's sort of exploring his new power, and he actually thinks, I could probably reverse this and like save them. But then he also goes, that's not something I should do though, because that's a misuse of my power. Which is funny enough after pausing time. So then he lets that happen. As I said earlier, he's basically grabbed this like Harlequin and been like, you'll come with me, come here, boy. And he eventually says to them, listen, I want to make a deal. I won't tell any of the Imperial forces about the ruins of this craft world, which clearly you're protecting, if you can get me across the Great Rift. And the Harlequin's like, they hate him. They even actually, there's a part where he also invades the minds of the Eldari ships, and I think, as Colin knows, some of the Eldari ships are powered by spirit stones and the Infinity Circuit as well.
The Infinity Circuit runs through the heart of every Eldar craft world, except for Bieltan, because it kind of got shattered.
And
don't worry about that one.
Don't worry about that one. And they kind of like the ancient Eldari minds, when they sense Mephiston's in there, like, hey, get out of it, hey, like that's like, get off my lawn.
Oi, bad touch.
It's a funny.
Go away. Part. It's quiet in here.
Yeah, they're like, oh, human, disgusting, and
let their dog off the leash. It's pissing into my Infinity Circuit.
It's they do sort of make a deal with Mephiston. They go, fine, we'll take you across like through the webway if you promise to keep your word. So like, a Harlequin's basically on their ship, like guiding them through the webway for a bit, and he's like so miffed. He's like, I fucking hate all of you. You know what I mean? Like he's like, I hate all of you, but we made a deal.
He does anything, he just ended with glitter bombs filled with tannerite in his mailbox back on Ball. Kegerack,
Get
another classic
the Mark
prank.
Rober experience, Warhammer style. And they sort of managed to get across the Great Rift, which obviously is mostly impossible at this time. And this takes them to the jungle world of Sabassus. Now, Sabassus is an isolated planet. It's not the same as what happened to Divinus Prime, but essentially it's sort of quite close to the Great Tear, the Great Rift. So it's been cut off for a long time, sort of for quite a while now. And they eventually arrive, Mephiston, Raceless, Anthros, and they relieve the Imperial forces on the world who are being attacked by funny enough, a Tzeentchian cult uprising. Mephiston saves his captain named Federac, and there's a really interesting scene between the two where they are like having a conversation where Federac has actually previously seen a demon prince. And when a human looks at something like that, they're basically like walking dead at that point. There's no coming back from that. They'll eventually go mad. And Mephiston says the only reason you're not like a bubbling, mewling mess, essentially, is because there's a painting inside one, like the halls of this area. And it's a painting of the Emperor. And it's supposedly actually painted during the time of the Great Crusade. And Mephiston says like the artist, like he looks upon it and said the artist at the time was there when the Emperor like started the Great Crusade, and it captures like the true kind of presence of the Emperor within the painting. And essentially that imagery of the Emperor has like saved Federac's mind for a little bit, but Mephiston does say like, unfortunately you are like walking dead and you will die at some point, but I need your help. And it's a weird moment where like you kind of go like, oh yeah, he's like Mephiston the scholar like half the time, rather than just being, because Warhammer is mostly like grimdark, badass, and then horrible tragedy. So there's like that moment where it shows a little bit of a different side to him, and he's very like, when he does speak, he is very intelligent. So he's extremely well read, and obviously pretty much has like a ridiculously powerful mind, which can basically like the Sherlock Holmes of the Blood Angels as well. At this point, why not add it to the list of overpowered things? And they need Federac because Federac can lead them to a temple in the mountains, which is where he originally saw the demon. They do, funny enough, Mephiston leaves Lucius Anthros behind, which much as Anthros is like sort of complain, but he's like, no, there's a reason for this. And the Blood Angels, as they finally enter this like temple ground, it's in this really weird like reflective underground section where like it's hard to explain, but they do enter this temple area, and they are eventually ambushed by rubric marines and a greater demon of Tzeentch, which looks like a floating bird mask with a cloak. Funny enough, it looks quite small, so I find it bizarre. Like this is like a greater demon, but it's like, okay, fine enough. But
Hey, it's Tzeentch. He's
Yep.
he's not the one all about power.
Yeah, but the good old rubric marines burst out and they attack them in this temple. At the center of this temple grounds, there's a ritual stone, and it starts to burn. And then they realize like something like a ritual is being set off, like arcing fire is like spewing out from it. Mephiston just lunges forward and literally just smothers it with his body, using it as like sort of a way to absorb the heat from it, so like his body and armor can take it. And then this is really bizarre, this part. Then Mephiston splits himself into three. He sends his mind into Raceless to coordinate the battle between the Blood Angels and the Rubric Marines. He uses his body to like hold on to the stone and like absorb the heat. And then he sends his soul into the warp to chase the demon down. So essentially he literally just splits himself apart, and
Getting all Doctor Strange all of a sudden.
yeah, it's a very impressive but like very bizarre moment. But then it gets even weirder because Mephiston's soul, as I should have mentioned earlier, by the way, is often described as like three souls, where it's like implied there's one that's Calistarius, one that's Mephiston, and there's one that's like the avatar of the Black Angel. So he's like coalescing into this weird being. And when Mephiston appears in the warp, he wakes up with like no memory of what's like who he is or what's happening, but he appears like a burnt, flayed man, and essentially he's like raw, flayed muscle, and he's like all crackled and black, and he basically looks like the manifestation of the Black Rage, but he's not like pissed off or angry. But he does have, funny enough, Vitaros, his sword is with him though. The sword doesn't leave for some reason. Like even there's this weird like warp creature, like there's like a dog, and it's like, yo, can I have that sword? And he's like, nah, it's mine. Like, pretty sure, like I'm pretty sure that's mine. And like some other creatures like try to take it from him, and he just like sprouts wings. He's like, get away from me.
He does Bilbo from.
Oh yeah, like grab the
goes,
ring.
Yeah.
Let me give you this mithril, and then like give your childhood nightmares.
Yeah.
And then apologizes after, like, "Oh, my bad. That was quite quite rude of me." Like, really?
Did that scare anyone else, by the way, when they were younger, when they first saw that?
I saw Lord of the Rings for the first time 2 years ago. So
Sheesh.
I was
You saw
in the
it.
cinema when it first came out. When was that? Oh, geez, I'm so old.
I still haven't seen the other 2 movies.
They're good,
Bro.
man.
I've read the books.
They're still
Okay,
good
good.
films, though. Right?
I
I
was
know they're
10.
good movies, and I know I'd like them.
For
I just
people
haven't
listening,
seen
Can
them.
you please put in the
Yeah,
chat,
they're-
like, Colin needs
They're one of
to
those like
watch Lord of
films,
the
those
Rings.
one of those film series where it's just like they are pretty much. I know the Fellowship of the Ring is like a perfect example of like the structure of a film. Like you look at the screenplay, it is pitch perfect. It's like first 10 pages, it does the whole flashback with the war and blah blah. But yeah, great films without going too into it.
Fellas in the chat, I've got a better idea. Get a compilation of every time I've said I haven't seen X movie or Y TV show, and then take a shot every time I do so. And then please inform us how quickly you're in the hospital.
Jeez.
We do not support that on Law Crimes, but it would be funny. Just do that for legal purposes there. So
Of course.
Mephiston essentially is woken up without much memory of himself, but he's like the weird avatar of what his power is. And he's the warp, by the way. I wish I'd written it down the way they describe it, because it literally sounds like some crazy artist, like you're living inside like a moving painting. It's like rippling with color, and I've never seen it in other things. Like they often describe the warp as like like a mix of weird rippling energy, but this is like a full-on like multicolored rainbow picture of like colliding color and shapes and ideas and concepts. It's so weird. It's actually quite like a good part of the book. The book itself is a little bit confusing in times, but this is particularly like really like visually it's such like a feast, and it's so good in terms of its description. And he's also like travel through the warp. He's also follow other weird twisted monsters and creatures and other sorcerers, because everyone seems to be venturing towards this one place. So like the kind of pace of the book is like really slowed down here. It's like going, what the hell is going on? And they realize like everything's heading towards something called the City of Light. And this is Prospero. So this is long dead Thousand Sons, Magnus the Red home that's in the warp. And it is guarded by like Zangors and things like that. And the reason that everyone is traveling towards the City of Light, supposedly like people who've been corrupted or like demons or just creatures of the warp, is because they're essentially recruiting in the City of Light, because there's a plan for it to eventually emerge back into the real space and basically ruins everyone's day, because why not, Magnus? You did nothing wrong.
Ever.
Well.
So Mephiston sort of joins this weird shambling horde. It's like he looks like one of the other monsters there, so he kind of like blends in. He even like talks to a few of them, like, can I skip the line? They're like, I don't know, bro. Like it's a pretty long line to get in. Like at the movie theater.
Have you got a wristband? No, I haven't got a wristband. Oh,
No, but eventually Mephiston goes, screw it. And he just breaks his way in, like attacks the guards, just rushes up these like crystal stairs. And he does like sort of chase this. He finds a demon again and starts to chase it around Prospero. Like they see like the ghosts of obviously the people who lived in Prospero, like, and obviously Space Wolves and like 1,000 Sons who have died there. Like there's sort of echoes of what the the wounds of the old burning of Prospero. And eventually chases this demon and finds him in this like tower area. Even follows like some other people there. It's kind of bizarre. And then unfortunately this like demon Mephiston, or his soul, gets trapped. and he realizes that it's been an ambush. And the demon reveals himself to be Zadkiel. He was essentially a servant of... I don't know if he was previously a Thousand Son or not. I can't remember, but he's like a servant of Magnus the Red. And he sort of tells Mephiston how I've been behind so much of your journey, like since Divinus Prime. I was the one who like architected that. Morsus, that was me. You know, I've been manipulating you for centuries because I've needed you for something. I've been basically nurturing you for my own purposes. And also, a side note as well, at this time that Mephiston is caught, Anthros, who's gone off on his own, like he thinks to himself, oh, Mephiston must have sent me off to do something. I'm here to work out something. So he goes to one of the towers of the world. I'll explain that in a little bit. But unfortunately, essentially on Anthros on his own journey, he's also realized like, oh, his power that we mentioned earlier that was a bit suspicious. It was because the Sleepless Mile, the power that he'd been using, like, you know, we dreaming, something that he'd been doing in secret since Morsus and the Sons of Helios chapter taught him that. It was actually a ritual designed by Tzeentch. So he's actually been corrupting himself, and he starts to like sprout feathers, and he's like turning into a greater demon of Tzeentch. Like, oh, and he realizes it's happening in real time, and he's like feeling his body corrupt. Meanwhile, Zadkiel has again, he says like he's nurtured Mephiston. He's been using him because he needs Mephiston as a conduit for a enormously powerful ritual to bring Prospero back into real space. Mephiston is basically the reason he's been making Mephiston for this.
He's the catalyst.
Yeah, he's the catalyst. He's not making Mephiston, but Mephiston will be the perfect catalyst, as Colin said, just to bring him back. And they reveal that on the planet where one of the temples they've been fighting in, like the Blood Angels and Raceless, is called one of the Fingers. It's called a Finger Mountain. There are actually 9 fingers, multiple finger towers. No, they're called the Fingers, essentially, the nickname of these mountains. And they're not actually mountains. They're silver towers of Tzeentch that have been grown over. And they realize like it's almost like a hand. And essentially, Mephiston is going to be used as a conduit to replace where Prospero is, like sort of as a switcheroo, essentially. So they're going to replace where the fingers are, and then switch Prospero in its place, land it on top of Sabassus, and then Prospero's back in real space. And he needs to channel all that power through Mephiston, eventually, like, you know, burn him up, whatever. And Zadkiel, the little demon, is like laughing, and he like enacts the plan. Like he takes a cut of Mephiston's blood, and then he like, you know, the ritual begins, and he starts to, you know, it's all going off, and he is so happy. But something goes wrong. Like he's basically, it's like Mephiston's like basically explodes in front of him into light, and he starts like waddle his way over to Magnus the Red to tell him of his amazing power he's done. He's looking around him going, this doesn't look like Sabassus outside. Like something hasn't gone quite right. And this was because as the ritual was taking place, something went wrong. And just a brief foray back in time, Mephiston becoming a Primaris was obviously very powerful, can stop time, but he was actually more powerful than we even realized. And he was strong enough to see that Lucius Anthros had been corrupted, so he was powerful enough to detect the Tzeentchian like corruption flowing within him, even if Anthros wasn't willingly turning against him. And when he gave him that scepter earlier, the scepter was actually something to use at this very moment, because he had foreseen that he was being manipulated for a long time. He couldn't. This is the part I didn't quite like the ending of this book as well, because like it's one of those like, haha, I knew all the entire time.
It's very JoJo.
It's a little bit like
I knew, in fact, that you were going to do this.
You know, I knew all along, but
you may have outsmarted me, but I have outsmarted your outsmarting.
Yeah, it's a little
with
bit
my hormone.
It's a little bit like that, which I don't think is the best ending, but it is still a representation of how far he's come. And he saw Anthros would be used in some way, so he gave him the scepter, and he realized like Anthros was part of the ritual too, And so with Andros's like last remaining moments of sanity, he uses the scepter itself to polarize the ritual. So instead of sending Prospero basically where Sabassus was, it sends the mountain/towers of Tzeentch back into the warp. And so when so go ahead, say.
So now it's time for what is the Zelda game? Is it Ocarina where the moon's crashing down?
Oh, Majora's Mask.
Majora's Mask. Yeah, now it's time for that, but with 9 of the damn things.
Yeah. So essentially, Zadkiel like pops over to the court of Magnus, which is just really brief like foray into that. It's like filled with like sorcerers on discs and like demons like hanging about, and like Thousand Sun sorcerers like sort of conversing was. By the way, Magnus the Red in this book is like a little bit in it, and he's like just randomly like at times like in his like demon throne would stand up and just randomly espouse things. So he's fully mad. So just to show you like what a demon Magnus is like, and Zadkiel goes like, I did it. The whole thing is like going right, and he's like, Magnus like, are you sure about that? He was like, are you sure about that? You know, pulling back the thing like John Cena, and because then Zadkiel goes, oh. And he sees like the towers of Tzeentch. He's like, "Oh my god, how did I get tricked? I've been planning this for literal centuries." And so like basically Demon Magnus like, "You're going to prison / worse prison than you can imagine." And
super hell.
Basically super hell. And it's revealed that Mephiston actually did trick the demon. Like he'd not been passive for the last few centuries, he'd been working out what was going on, and you know, him noticing what was wrong with Raceless, they did find a way to polarize that ritual, but it did obviously, unfortunately, it did save Lucius Anthros, but it cost him his life, so it spared him from becoming a demon. But so it used, instead of using Mephiston in the ritual, it basically ended up using Lucius. And when they arrive back on Baal, Raceless and Mephiston are kind of like in his Anthros's personal quarters, kind of going through like his collection, because they've been fighting with him for a long time at this point. And Raceless is kind of he always been like the grumpy, like older librarian, like always been a bit disapproving for Anthros for a long time, because he always kind of was a bit overprotective of Mephiston. And only like very recently, like even in this book, he kind of like, and in the end of like the last book as well, he kind of accepted Anthros, like, you know, you're finally worthy. And just when he was finally worthy, he died. So he was obviously a bit gutted. And Raceless even asked Mephiston like if there was any way to like save him, and Mephiston just goes, "But I did." And actually, it's the first time like Raceless properly gets angry at him, because he kind of, there's a bit where Raceless is now realizing like Mephiston's actually so powerful that he's kind of, but you know how he's almost like not seeing them like ants, but there's a bit more of a chasm between him caring about normal people.
Yeah, he's seeing them like the Emperor sees people.
Yeah, he's a little bit, he's not being ruthless. Like he did save Sabassus, he did save the thing, he stopped Lucius turning into a demon, but then it's kind of, he's a little bit, he sounds almost heartless at some points.
Yeah, he's not gone full Iron Hands where it's like, you are a number in the calculus, it doesn't matter. He's like, I've still got some humanity, but...
Alberto Rabo.
Yeah. So he's not cruel, but again, it's a little bit, you know, like how the Emperor is not intentionally malicious, but it's no things he classes it under necessity. And it kind of ends with Mephiston drawing, like he's been sketching like random things like throughout his like life, and even in his book, obviously Blood Angels like artists and they're very creative. And he does sort of finally sketch like a replica of the Emperor's painting that he saw on Sabassus, and it kind of he looks at it in a way where he takes a sort of a bit of hope from it, to the way like the captain did. I can't remember what his name was. It was Sabadok or something like that. He the way that he took hope from it, and he kind of realized like, yeah, like he is doing a lot of like crazy stuff, but he's like Mephiston, Lord of Death, servant of the Emperor, son of Sanguinius. Like he is basically duty bound, and he will, as the avatar of like the Black Angel, essentially just do his best to keep going forward and essentially fighting for the Imperium until one day he does become the Black Angel. So it's a bit of a funny moment, like he kind of weirdly accepts like, yeah, I'm gonna like have a horrible end, but I'm just gonna keep doing, like, I'm just gonna keep getting victories for the Imperium as much as I can, and like defending worlds and things like that. And he kind of it ends in a moment where like he just walks away, and then he's like ready to fight his next journey, and that's kind of the end of Mephiston's tale. Sorry, boys, that's a really long one, but there was just so much to cover. Is there any particular points you guys thought was like interesting or was particularly weird? Because there's quite a few of them. There was like the Divinus Prime book, the one where they fight on like the bone world, which I thought was very cool. And that was one of my favorite.
That is cool.
It's a pretty good.
He certainly is Dio.
Indeed.
He is.
Sounds like there were a lot of really cool set pieces in Mephiston's journeys.
Oh yeah, I
didn't walk.
Okay, sorry.
Oh no, you first.
I was gonna say I did. Unfortunately, funny enough, as much as I've said, I have skipped quite a few things because the fight with Kabanda in the warp, as like there are other demons around, is pretty amazing. I did skip unfortunately quite a bit of the Morsus book with the Necrons. There's like some really crazy scene where like the Necron sends scarabs at Mephiston, and essentially like goes like some of the Primaris Marines get literally torn apart in front of him, and he just ignites Vitaras and just starts slashing as fast as he can to the point where literally the scarabs like swarming around him in a bubble, and he's literally just like yelling, going like kind of Dragon Ball Z. Literally, he's like trying to go to like Super Saiyan 2 to 3, if you know what I mean. Like there's a really
he's at 1. He's got to get to 2 now.
Well, no, literally 2 to 3. Like he's literally yelling like that, and
I see what you mean now.
And like Vitaras is again just being the sturdiest boy ever, and he even fights like another Cryptek there as well. One of them like poisons Raceless, and he like has to use like blood magic things to, like draw out the poison from him. It's quite cool. There is a cool part in the last book called City of Light, which obviously is reference to Prospero, which is the part where the warp is obviously quite good imagery. Unfortunately I didn't do the craft world quite enough justice, because they do walk through the ruins of this long dead craft world. It's not implied that any of the famous ones of now. It's like a War in Heaven era, maybe possibly, or later. That one's like a really eerie scene, and they see like they start to fight like they're clearly being tricked by like something's wrong with just the general area of it, because obviously like ancient Eldari souls have died here and things like that. But he does do quite a lot, and there's a lot of complexity to his character in terms of people think a lot more of him, but the real him is just somewhat of a more contemplative soul who wields obviously a great power. And he is cool. He's ridiculously overpowered. I'm pretty sure we all agree on that, don't we? Like he's ridiculously overpowered, but it's always in a way where like it's not like, oh, and then he completely just completely crunked the enemy and then it was fine. It was always in a way he's always like had to outsmart his enemy, which I always liked in the Mephiston books, which is quite good. Yeah, sorry, does anyone have any like questions or like cool things that perhaps he's done, or any thoughts?
I would like to again give a brief mention to his appearance in Angel's Death, just because it's like a nice cameo from him where Kazarian's just about to be shipped off to the Death Watch, and he's praying in front of the Angel of Sanguinius, and then he's like, "Oh, please give me the strength." And then Mephiston just appears. And he's like, "What are you doing here?" And he's like, I'm just." And he's like, "You're a liar." He's like, "Oh, I'm not sure if I have the strength to last the curse." And he's like, "I don't know what to do." And Mephiston just goes, "There's nothing you can do." And then he gives him the blood. And when the camera's panning around Kazarian, he just keeps like disappearing and reappearing in different spots in the room without seemingly moving. And you're like, "Oh, that's creepy." And he's got like this, this veil of shadows over his face, and he's got these glaring red eyes. And I just think I think especially because seeing him in a visual form like that rather than just the artworks, which are static a lot of the time, it was just seeing how imposing and vampiric and otherworldly he was in that scene, which I thought was really cool.
What are you, Colin?
I would like to say you've done a fantastic job, Andy, with the beginning, and you with the expert, to the point that I was almost ready to give Mephiston the highest honor I can give a Space Marine character, which is, I like you. 6 out of 10. Unfortunately, the ending kind of tripped the ball a bit. Not you, but the ending of the last book.
It's a not
not not for the outsmarting reason, because it was GW going, hey, you know this cool big jury this guy's been on? Oh, Chaos did it. It's all Chaos. Thanks for coming, everyone.
It's a little bit of it's not his last. I mean, it won't be his last book. It's just the last of the initial trilogy by Darius Hinks, I think, the author.
Yeah, I just don't like when they always fall back on. Yeah, Chaos is behind everything.
Do you reckon he's really got much place to go? It seems like he's had quite a good arc.
Too.
I think there is more to explore in terms of like he not necessarily on the rage side of it, but more as in I think his interaction with the rest of the chapter, because kind of like his solo journey is done. But what I said, like also his Black Rage stuff is mostly like entirely separate. It's just after he became Mephiston, the demon Zadkiel started to mess with him because it was like, Mephiston, that guy seems powerful. I bet I could use that to my advantage. So the Black Rage stuff is all him, like him conquering it and all that stuff is not the manipulation. I don't know if I maybe implied that.
Do you think if Mephiston like was from this point onward largely only relegated to major like codex events, do you think you would be satisfied, or do you think he needs more? Just out of curiosity.
I don't think he needs more character development in terms of it's kind of like his character development has got to a good point. I think it's just they need to do something where like that needs to then be done with the chapter in terms of like this is all separate from the chapter. It's mostly just him and like a few blood angels.
I guess
it's the Mephiston show.
I guess to reword the question a bit, do you think he needs more books for that, or do you think if he were to be like I say relegated, like it's a dishonor to be front center in a codex, but if he were to be like put aside to be like mostly just in codexes and maybe a couple appearances, it's like a kind of like an Angel it's a Death cameo, like in books, do you think that would be all right, or do you think he needs more books?
Oh, like, it doesn't need
him front and center.
There's no need for more books, but I think there must inevitably be the Ahriman versus Mephiston. If they don't do that one day at least, I'd be so upset. And also, I just think there's opportunities. Yeah, I'd do that. I don't know because honestly, the authors might have something more they want to say. I just think the author Darius Hinks, who wrote the trilogy of Mephiston specifically, I think he's like put it in a good spot where like Mephiston's at a good point. Obviously, there's more trials and tribulations. You know, good old Uriel Ventress has had 6 books and he's still going. He's still going through stuff. So, I can't say if what.
Kai came.
I feel as well as a Space Marine enjoyer, there's a lot of fans who are like crying out for other characters in different factions to get more spotlight. And I feel like the more books we have of a Mephiston or a Uriel Ventress, the more those fans are like, can we please have some Iron Hands lore or some like White Scars or something that's like that needs some like desperate new stuff to keep up to date.
I don't think crossovers is a good opportunity for him because again he should be mentor Mephiston rather than.
No, I mean just like put him on the bench for now. Let the other factions have their time, and then hopefully when the setting progresses a bit more, we can bring him back for another outing. You know?
Can we have a Krieg book that isn't Vrax so we can get something about them that isn't shovel memes, please? I beg of you. I beg of you, GW.
What about you, Eli? What would you say?
I like him. Mephiston's cool, even if you hurt my boys, the Gene Stealers, and my boys, the Necrons, and my boys, the Eldar.
I don't think he's
a lot of L's today.
Eldar, really.
It's okay. The Harlequins.
Yeah.
I guess he didn't really fight them though. He just trolled them.
Just a prank.
I do think we should do a Calor Drago versus Mephiston versus episode. That'd be fun.
That'd be very fun. Although today it should be Calor Drago versus the Warp at the same time.
I already know who wins.
Yeah, for real.
Calor Drago versus the Doomslayer.
All right. Well, I think we know who wins that one in the other direction.
People have been gagging for the Ahriman versus Mephiston just because it's the two most powerful psychers in the setting. So that'll be a interesting time. Just because I think technically Mephiston is more powerful than Ahriman, just because Mephiston's power is like he's got something more powerful, basically powering him up. But maybe Ahriman's a better sorcerer in terms of he could do more. But the Mephiston's cool. There's a lot that goes on, as we could tell. This has been a long episode of 40 Boys, but with that being said, though, I don't know, what is our next episode on, boys? Did we already decide that one, if I remember correctly? I think it's up in the air at the moment, actually. So if people want to make any suggestions for future episodes, just
comment below. Endless Space 2, make it happen.
If you want to comment an endless stream of Caiaphas Cain or Godric and Felix, feel free to do so. I'm not telling you to do so, of course, just, suggesting. Or Pellinal Whitestrike.
Give Colin the opportunity to do a 2.5 hour episode of pure Godric.
Part 1 of 9 of Caiaphas Cain.
Or part 1 of 18 of Godric and Felix.
Yeah.
Oh, that would be
Glorious.
I'm not even paying. That's fun. With that being said, though, thank you guys so much for watching. I've done a research into Mephiston a few times, so glad to finally use it all up in one go and to actually for it to be useful. Hope you guys all enjoyed, and hopefully enjoyed Mephiston's current lore too. Got a very cool model on the tabletop, and got some cool lore too. And with that being said, thank you so much for listening and watching. Comment below for any suggestions for future episodes, and we'll see you all next time. Peace.
Take care, everyone.
Love you.
Bye, Armored Core.